Okay, doors are closed. We're locked in here. So, good morning, everybody. Today we've got a full morning on an ocean of energy. A lot of work has been going on in marine renewable energy that you haven't seen at ADB. There's been some work going on floating solar plus in the Pacific, which my colleague Cindy at the back is leading, and that will probably lend on to some lending in the Pacific. And I've been running a TA looking at marine renewable energy and the co-benefits. So instead of saying what marine renewable energy can we use, saying how can we use marine renewable energy to create more development and provide cleaner oceans. So we'll kick off today with a first session looking at technology. And I think the theme you'll have from the technology is that we have all the technology already. What we haven't figured out is the economics and how we can tie it together and make it work. So the second session is going to be about how we can look at things in a new way to see if we can make new development opportunities and also create more wealth and maybe bring a few people into having better livelihoods and also clean up the ocean in the process. So they may all sound mutually exclusive, but surprisingly, you can do it. So if I could ask the nice folks at the back to cue up the video from Raul, who got COVID and can't come. Video, please. Good.
Everybody. My name is Raul Kubicek, and I'm the Managing Director of NEOS Taiwan. Unfortunately, I cannot be in person with you today. I actually arrived on Monday, but sadly, COVID caught up with me, so I'm grateful that I could do a recording. I'm isolating, so not joining you, also for your own safety. I'm very pleased to be giving the opportunity to speak at this deep dive workshop on ocean of energy and then on offshore wind, which is a maturing technology and will be very important for the energy transition in the region. Just to let me very quickly give you an outline of what should be like a 10-minute recording. I will first go into a short introduction of our background, and then I will talk about APEC, offshore wind, and how it's maturing. So we already see markets like China who are very mature, and then markets on the jump or very new markets. Then I will quickly give an introduction on what kind of is missing in some of the markets to make it really robust, and then give a short outlook for Southeast Asia and what kind of issues we are trying to solve or should be solved in the region to make this really a growing industry. Perhaps just also then on myself, I'm already living in Taipei for the last 15 years, have been working in semi-government and consultancies, and basically a lot focusing on offshore wind. And for the last 3 years, I'm the Managing Director of NEOS in Taipei. We are a multidisciplinary engineering company with 2,600 staff. And in APEC, we have the largest business line, actually international development. And we are very proud that we are recognized as the top two consulting firm for the Asian Development Bank for consulting services in the Philippines. Quite an achievement, and I hope we can keep it up. In itself, in offshore wind, we are active in APEC for the last 10 years, working with governments, working with project owners and tier one. And in Europe, for example, in offshore wind, we are also working with the Crown Estate, which does the leasing rounds in the UK, and also with Danish state-owned companies like Energinet or the Danish energy agencies on offshore wind. And we are active in Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Australia. And we are also expanding now in the Philippines, which we see as a very interesting market. Just perhaps before I go a little bit into this slide, to give you an imagination of the size of offshore wind, which is already matured in Europe and in some markets in APEC. So currently we are looking at 8 megawatts for one turbine, which can reach a hub height so of 110 meters. And then even 15 megawatt turbines can already go as high as 265 meters, which if you see the Petronas towers, they're 452 meters high, so they're quite tall structures. 150 megawatt turbine can provide energy for 20,000 households, and the cell can weigh already 685 tons. They stand on foundations which are weighing 2,000 tons on monopiles, the largest one, or on jackets which are 80 meters tall and can weigh up to 1,200 tons. So these are really heavy structures, which even so offshore wind is modular. They have a lot of demand on the sizes of your infrastructure like ports and delivery and offshore works. Also to mention is that offshore wind needs space on the sea. which gives you stable wind. But for example, 2.5 gigawatt project that is currently in planning in the area of Zhanghua would go at 212 square kilometers, which is 5 times the size of Manila for 14 to 20 megawatt turbines. The upside of offshore wind is basically that you have really good wind access. It's basically on the sea, so no obstacles. You can build really at size, so that makes it a little bit more impactful than solar, because that is far more dispersed usually. But then it also is a huge investment into these kind of infrastructures. So if you look into the region, and then there is this very well-known global wind atlas to the left, the best areas for offshore wind is basically within the Taiwan Strait, goes down to Vietnam, good conditions in Japan, around Australia. It's always a good indicator, but then you will still need to do some more local wind energy assessments on the stability and availability of wind. If you look into the region, and it's very good to see that China is basically the global market leader in terms of installation, has a very strong supply chain, their own vessels, they have their own wind turbine manufacturers. Then we have seen a lot of developments in Japan, where there is the first commercial wind farm in Akita. And now we're going into the second auction in Japan. Vietnam sadly had a little bit of a setback on the PDP-8, so that is now fixed. So we hope that we see good and robust developments coming up, and that there will be a clear road to markets. Korea has already given electricity licenses, and there is a first floating wind farm that has gone through financial investment decision. Somehow the regulations sometimes are still a bit opaque and needs to be built, which is one of the challenges for each market where we go in later. So currently, as mentioned, Europe is very major in terms of markets and supply chain. And we actually see that now in Asia, that there is a supply chain forming. One for definitely is in China, but then if you think about jackets, it's Indonesia and Korea. There is some in Taichung and in Taipei, as well as in Japan. And then Vietnam, for example, does offshore substations, and we probably see soon jacket manufacturing or other things in the region. So it will be key to actually bring the supply chain closer to Asia to make it a really cost competitive industry, which is for example, in China. Now, while offshore wind is a major technology, we still look at the challenge that offshore wind is really new for a lot of markets in Asia. It poses a unique challenge on the policy environment. What is really good is that we see that the Ministry of Economics or Department of Energy often take the lead, but it involves so much more agencies, because usually offshore areas are not well understood from regulation. They're often a blank paper. The environment is not understood. It might be that even fisheries are not really understood. There is a lot of agencies that have to be actually involved in these kind of projects, that goes to the environment agencies, the transportation and shipping agencies, harbor authorities. Local constituencies are very important. It will be about certification, it will be about labor law, HSE, and so on. So it's a very complicated construct that needs to be better understood. And what we have seen actually is that a holistic marine spatial planning approach should be the best. We have seen it a little bit in Europe. If you take examples as Germany or UK and Denmark, it's a far more orderly rollout if government first think about marine spatial planning and try to first find good areas, try to de-risk them with surveys, and then hand them over to the developers. What is also very important to mention is offshore wind takes a long time. So what we usually see is that until you start construction, it can take 5 to 7 years. So the consenting and permitting process needs to be very clear, and the environment needs to be understood. And you're also looking at a heavy investment. So currently 1 gigawatt would probably get you an investment somewhere for the whole project at 3 billion to 5 billion US dollar. So while the owners will probably bring equity of 20% and upwards investment, later on you need to finance the whole thing. So it needs to be very robust also from the market and energy market design and the grid. It's a large risk to invest in these. So you need a really strong support and will of the government. Perhaps just then also to highlight what we lately see with rising inflation rates and also interest rates. Project owners will be very picky on where they will put their projects. And this is again coming back to robustness. Also, we have an intense global competition for resources. That is, for example, vessels. There's not enough vessels in the markets. Supply of talents, and other things that need to be used in these offshore wind farms. So it's very important that you have a robust system so that projects can be really capitalized. Also be very careful on your market designs. If you have not yet built offshore wind farms, auctions might be too early. So what we have seen, for example, in Taipei is that now for the round 3, these are reliant on CPPAs, but the market is not there yet. It's too early to do that, especially with what happens now after the Ukraine or the Russian aggression towards the Ukraine. So also what we see in Taipei is that the government has stopped zonal development and allowed developers to choose their own sites and then just go through a site recordation process. That has led to a little bit of market dysfunction. But then still Taipei is a really good way to learn from markets, and it's not far away from the Philippines. So there's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot of things that can be done better. By 2030, we will probably see at least 30 gigawatt in the region ex-China, and China is again its own market and will be probably even more sizable. If it really went well, we will see 70 gigawatt. So if we can manage to build a supply chain in APEC that works across APECs and avoids hard localization, that can actually bring a big boost in the next 7 years to that industry and have very highly competitive renewable energy coming from offshore wind. And then perhaps as food from thought from my side, working in that sector since 2009, and welcome to an open discussion. The Chinese is actually from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and translates commander, stands for the virtues of wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness. And you can basically read this a little bit, is that it's very important to stay straight online. Again, these are very long-term projects. And then also strictness doesn't necessarily mean you should be scolding your people. It means just to really hold the line, to see it through, to be serious about it, is both for government and the project owners to have a really good playing field for this. Just some last points on this one. On marine spatial planning, really, really important again and again. It is good that the private sector often in a lot of markets go first. That creates momentum, but it could also create friction. So it should be for the government to do holistic planning, to see also where can it actually be built, where should it be built first, and then how that can expand. Also important, and a lot of countries now do this with the help of development institutions or with their own efforts, is understand your own regulatory system, especially environmental impact assessments on the sea. Is a completely new field. There's often no guidance, and this guidance needs to be created. We see this in Vietnam and the Philippines, but we also know that these departments are on it and working on this. Also contrast this to other countries and see how you can make it adjust to your own government systems and ways that you do. Again, very important. This brings me through 3, the clear regulatory paths. They have to be stable and predictable, and small delays, these are very complicated projects. So small delays can already have a really big ripple effect on those projects, and that they then slip a lot. Then good international industry practice, very, very important. There are guidelines, Equator Principle, IFC, performance standards. We see in the APEC region now that even if you are an OECD country, an ESIA will be needed because the banks are getting more and more stricter on ESG. And there are actually some issues like, for example, fishery, but also biodiversity that are getting touched upon by offshore wind and should be considered. You can consider them at the beginning of the project or after consent, but they need to be considered and then upgraded. And then on capacity building, that is very important and should be done really early on. And it involves actually all stakeholders, government, education, also project owners and others, to really start training the market, introduce university courses, get talent, retrain talent so that they can work in offshore wind, because it's very dissimilar to onshore wind. It's an offshore work, so it's more a marine construction project than anything else, which needs a lot of special know-how. And then perhaps last but not least, and we know that the development banks are actually already looking in this, and that's also now a lesson from Taipei, where actually, and sadly, the public-owned banks are very careful, because for the banks often locally, these are very new projects and they don't necessarily understand them, so they tend to shy away. But as now credit and financing gets tight, it's very important that actually there are guarantees. Usually in offshore wind projects, you will see export credit agencies, you will see international banks coming in, and then you will see some local banks. But it's very important that you have banks that are kind of starting early to de-risk, to help getting things off the ground, and perhaps even guaranteeing some parts of the projects to make investors comfortable in acting. Again, these are very large investments, and they will bring a lot of prosperity to each country in terms of industrial upgrading. It will create a lot of new jobs, and it will bring clean energy. So it's a huge opportunity. So went a little bit over time. Apologies for this. Thank you very much. And I'm not in the room, obviously, but my colleague and the managing director of NIOAS Asia Manila, Antti Inkinen, is in the audience, who you can reach out, as well as my colleague from the WIN team, Joyce Asilo. So if you have questions, you might contact them, and then we can set up meetings. Or if you have any questions, also my email is there. So feel free to reach out. Happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Wow. So you can see that WIND is very well established. And is Ante and Joy in the audience? Hi, Ante. Nice. Welcome. Thank you, Raul, for not coming. I know she sounds very weird, right? But he showed good judgment. It was very much appreciated for not getting us sick. Okay. So one of the things that was very interesting there was marine spatial planning. And talking about how we look at biodiversity and how we look at people who use that space, like fishermen and recreational folks, and all the other opportunities that we have in that space. So that's going to be a theme going forward through this discussion. My great pleasure now to invite my friend Geeta Singh from RedStack Energy, who's going to talk to us about a new form of energy, which is actually quite interesting.
First of all, I would like to thank ADB for giving me the opportunity to speak here. It's a privilege and honor. Thank you so much. So sorry, I can't see the presentation on the, it's not moving. So blue energy, it is also called salinity gradient power or osmotic energy. How is this developed? Is we use the difference in salt concentration between two water sources. One can be river water, the other can be seawater. There are other forms of freshwater sources and seawater sources that we can combine. And that could be a treated water from municipal sewage waste treatment plant and seawater, river water and brine water discharge from a salt factory, or a freshwater discharge from a hydro project going into the ocean. So with these combinations, we are able to generate using the methodology called reverse electrodialysis. It is also the reverse of desalinization. The current that we produce is DC current, and the output of this project is that we produce full continuous power, which is round the clock available throughout the year. Now, how the whole thing works. So you see the picture on the right side. So we have this module, which has ion selective membranes stacked together. And when we flow in the fresh water and the salt water wants to homogenize with the fresh water. And as a result of which, the ions start to flow in one direction. So the negative ions start flowing in the right direction, the positive ion starts flowing in the left direction, and as a result of which we generate electricity. Now, the global potential estimated for salinity gradient power is about 3.2 terawatt. And for Asia alone, the potential estimated is about 1 terawatt. Yeah, a little bit about RedStack. So we started researching on the salinity gradient power back in 2004 in the laboratories of WETSUS Institute. After doing research for about 7 to 8 years, we felt confident to set up a pilot project. And then we established this project in 2014, which was inaugurated by King William Alexander. We also received Dutch National Icon Award, the picture on the bottom right. This award is a very prestigious award for us because it's given only once in 3 years. Now, what we have done until 2022, we have upscaled the project by 2,000 times. We have resolved the initial set of challenges that we faced because we were trying to do this project in the real world scenarios. So all the initial hurdles and challenges that we faced, we've tried to overcome by design optimizations. And we're now in the process of setting up megawatt scale demonstration project for blue energy. Some of the observations from the pilot project. So the power that we can generate is round the clock power available throughout the year, meaning 365 into 24 into 7. we do not require any battery energy storage for generating this kind of power. The pilot project that we have set up in 2014 has been running now for 9 years, and we have not witnessed any degradation. So we can proudly say that this project has zero degradation. The capacity utilization factor from blue energy projects is as high as 99%. However, we use about 25% of the net output of the power that we generate. And as a result of which, the net output is about 75%, which compared to any other renewable energy source is the highest. A lot of ecological studies have been done on the pilot project that we have set up in the Apslodike region. And it has been observed that we do not cause any ecological harm to the flora and fauna around us. The O&M cost of these projects is comparable to the water treatment projects and is relatively low. So in 2023, what are we up to? So far from the PhD studies in the Vestas Institute, we have invested about 50 million euros so far. Now we are in the process of upscaling the pilot project by 16 times, and we are going to invest another 11 million euros, a part of which will go into manufacturing of the industrial size modules. With this upscaling, we will have established the process design for setting up megawatt scale blue energy project. Now, blue energy's role in energy transition. So as I said, since we're using 2 water flows, we are generating power which is fully sustainable. It is available 365 into 24 into 7, meaning round the clock, round the year power. It is highly predictable because the project that we design are designed using the base load flow of the river into the ocean. And we use the lowest flow to design our project. And therefore, we are able to generate round the clock power. We do not need any battery storage, so we can generate round the clock power without any battery storage required. And there are no conversion losses for the fact that if we are to use this power to feed into green hydrogen electrolyzers or to be supplied to industries directly, then it can be used the same way because we are generating DC current. Now, a Netherlands-based innovation, why do we like APAC region? So there are various reasons for that. One of the reasons is that Southeast Asia and Asia region enjoys proximity to equator, meaning warmer temperatures. Now, warmer temperatures helps in increasing the efficiency of the modules. And also the regions also have a lot of rivers flowing into the ocean. So as a result of which there are huge potential available in this region. The other important thing to note here is that about 2/3 of the project cost, the components can be sourced locally. And if we are to set up a large projects, we are also happy to bring in the local manufacturing into the regions that will be setting up the larger projects. So then, as a result of which, this project that we can develop will have 100% local made components. So that's about it. Thank you so much. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Well, Geeta, could I ask you to go back to one slide, the one with the map of Asia Pacific? That one there. No, that one. Yeah. Very interesting, because that's the exact inverse of the wind supply chain. Very interesting, right? So it's not one, it's the other. That was great. Thanks, Geeta. I really appreciate it. I'll ask you to pull up a seat. And can we queue up our next speaker? Oh, sorry, Norbert, I've got to get my glasses so I get your name correct. I'm sorry, my friend. From Norbert Schwartz, who's the Vice President Marketing Management for Andritz Hydro, and he's going to talk about Andritz's hydro technical solution for ocean energy.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, from my side. And I would also like to thank ADP to give us the opportunity to talk about advanced technologies to convert the power of oceans into electric energy. And I'm very glad that finally in one session we touched the topic of hydropower when we talk about clean energy. The Few words about our company. We are Austrian-based company. We are one of the world market leaders in hydropower equipment, with having over 180 years of experience in turbine manufacturing. I highlighted here the milestones of our company, and you can see 2 milestones were related to ocean power, a tidal power project in Korea, and in Scotland, the first commercial tidal current array project. So far, we have installed almost 32,000 turbines, totally 471 gigawatt, which is around 1/3 of the globally installed hydropower capacity. So this is the scenario 2050, how we see it for the hydropower. What was too fast? So, okay. So, of course, we have the well-established technologies for pump storage, for runoff river, for small hydro, and for low height applications. But there will be more and more an issue, the very low height, which is used in the tidal power stations, and hybrid solutions, either hydro and wind, hydro and solar, and also the tidal current array. So this is the scenario 2050. Yeah, when we talk about ocean energy, we know that 3/4 of Earth's surface is covered by water, thereof 97% is ocean. So there are vast opportunities to generate energy, either by tidal stream, by tidal range, by wave, but also by the solar and wind, amongst others. And so we are aware of this role, and we have that the ocean energy is playing an important role in this energy mix. And so we have developed innovative technologies, which you will see in a few minutes. So certainly there are different, already different technologies, how to get energy from tidal current, either by rotating devices, by oscillating devices, and there are also some prototypes for wave energy technologies. What we did, we have decided, or no, let's first go into the potential and the advantages. First of all, tidal power could be a very promising future for the energy source. The estimated potential, and we just talk about the technical potential, is around 3,060 terawatt hours per year. If you to get a feeling, what we're talking about is the globally installed hydropower capacity in 2020 was 4,370 terawatt hours. So that means around 3/4 of the already installed hydro capacity is the potential for the tidal power. What is the big advantage? It is clean, it is reliable, and it is predictable. So every investor, every client can easily calculate the energy production for any of these power plants. And it is another big issue nowadays, it is not influenced by weather conditions. So basically there are 2 options for exploitation: by kinetic energy from current close to the shore, or by potential energy from tidal ranges. So we have decided to invest in both technologies. You can see the tidal stream turbine on the left side, and on the right side, the tidal power station. Yeah. Why did we decide for these technologies? Because we have experience in rotating machines, so that is why this fits best to our already established know-how. We are not talking about some ideas or prototypes, so these are already executed projects. They're in operation, and I will show you in a few slides more details about these projects. So now we dive deeper into the technology of the tidal turbines. The tidal currents near the shore up to 3.5 meters per second. So literally we use the technology we use is based on wind technology. So the calculation of the power output is mainly driven by the velocity of the tidal current. So we have now already the 4th generation under development. So the first 3 are already in operation. You see the power output. We started with 300 kilowatt machines. Now we are at 1.5 megawatt. And very soon we will launch the 2 megawatt machines. On the lower line, you see already the generated energy up to date. So when we summarize the tidal current turbines. What is the criteria for the selection of location? The water depth, it should be between 35 and 100 meter. The current speed should be over 1 meter per second. Of course, the condition of the seabed and the distance to the power grid. The advantages are you can literally operate it 24 hours. You have no impact on marine life. First of all, do the very slow rotation, 15 RPM, and you have devices for monitoring and quick stop. It is a fast implementation. So from the start of a project to commissioning is around 24 months. And it is idle in combination with energy storage systems like pump storage or batteries. And it's a proven technology, maintenance-free, and we expect a lifetime of around 25 years. Of course, there are always obstacles. First of all, permits. To get permits due to environmental concerns. The commercialization is still an issue because it's due to few installed units. And there's still less assessment for countries which have potential sources for this kind of units. So the second technology is the tidal power stations. This is actually it's based on run-of-river plants, very simple. You see it is driven, the power output is driven by the head and by the discharge flowing to the turbine. And it can be applied for tidal ranges from 0.5 meter up to over 10 meter. So there are already 2 plants in operation for over 40 years, a big one in France with 240 megawatts. It is quite interesting because it has pump turbines, so it will operate in both flow directions. A smaller one in Canada with 18 megawatts. And the largest in the world ever built is in South Korea, the Shiva. It is totally with 260 megawatts with 10 units equipped. It is quite interesting. There is an existing dam built in the 1994 due to agriculture and reclamation of land. That led to an industrial and biological pollution of this area. So with the implementation of this project, it returned to natural exchange of water. And we know that Korea is very, very eager to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050. So that is also one of the reasons why they went for this project. Another interesting project, which was unfortunately stopped, fully developed, is Tidal Lagoon Swansea Bay in Wales, UK. It was stopped because of Brexit and changing government. It is at the time when we developed it, it is one of the biggest projects ever with over 350 megawatts. It's using the tidal range of 10.5 meter. Due to the shallow seabed gradient, we could have achieved a low seawall height, which led to a reduced construction cost. Yeah. It was planned to install bidirectional tidal pump turbines, 16 units with totally 350 megawatts. So you can generate power for incoming and outgoing tides. And in addition, you will achieve additional energy, annual energy production in the pumping mode. So there's a hope that the project will continue by private investors because they want to combine the project with quite interesting facilities. First of all, they want to build a battery gigafactory with 6.7 gigawatt hours of capacity. They want to install their floating PV. They want to build greenhousing, recreational centers, parks, marine center. So in this combination, I think the power plant will be a byproduct and should be commercially viable. So what are the criteria when we talk about tidal power stations? It should be in a bay or lagoon. The maximum tidal range should be around 10 meter. What are the advantages? Power generation for incoming and outgoing tides, which will increase the number of operation hours. Low seawall height means reduced construction costs. High installed capacity due to the large number of units. It is idle in combination with floating PV and batteries. and it is a proven technology, maintenance free, and it will create a lot of value for the local industry. The usual obstacles, it's permits, it's the tariff, and it's the funding of the projects. So I hope my presentation sparked you a bit about ocean energy, and I'm happy to talk about the more details in the break. Thank you.
Wow, Norbert, that I didn't realize that tidal energy was that far advanced. I know that there's a lot going on, but project in Wales sounds very, very interesting. Now I've got one of my favorite speakers. He spoke for me about 2 years ago. I'm not putting you under any pressure, my friend. But I really like the way he thinks. Agustino Miguel Garcia is the principal consultant at Sun Business Development and is also one of the lead consultants on the Floating Solar Plus TA that's being done in the Pacific. And he's been a star on that. Agustino is going to present on floating solar PV in the Pacific, a game changer. Agustino, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Stephen, for the very kind introduction. So indeed, the angle of the presentation is on floating PV, but clearly seeing it from a Pacific and Iceland perspective, and that's the title as being a game changer, because it's really a game changer. So acknowledgement to the TA 6680, led by ADB, and looking at 11 Pacific Island countries, which may be small inland, but they are very large ocean states with a lot of opportunities. And my colleagues have spoken a lot about ocean technologies. This one is focused on floating solar. So a little bit about the TA. It has 3 countries as priorities: Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Tonga. The other ones come in the next priorities. We are asked to provide concepts for projects in all of these countries, looking at floating and the opportunities that floating can actually provide for these countries and solve also some of the challenges that these countries have. So a floating PV technology is at the core of the TA. So actually providing a floating roadmap, a floating PV roadmap is one of the objectives. Just quickly on the technology, for those of you who are not very familiar, we have 2 basic concepts from floating. One that basically installs modules on floating structures. Another one that comes from aquaculture that adapted the aquaculture way of course, growing fish to actually be able to now install modules inside. So these are the 2 technologies and that we actually have. Where are we in terms of floating PV in the world? Most of the installations are in Japan in terms of number. Size-wise, as you probably guess, is in China. And we started this a little bit in Europe. It's coming back a little bit to Europe with all the projects that are being done. And clear, as you can see, the growth has been quite substantial over the years. And it is also at least planned or forecasted to even grow further in the next years to come. Some of the developments specifically in Asia. So we have this project in Singapore, one of the very much awaited projects in the world. So there was a lot of work done in Singapore, especially with Ceres, and this is actually the big 50 megawatt, 60 megawatt peak that was installed. We have this very nice one, I think definitely aesthetically probably number 1. And it's very interesting also technology, one that is piloted by the Koreans. And so we have this project installed in Hancheon in Korea. We have another one very interesting in Thailand, also substantially sized, so 45 megawatts. Going over to a huge one, which would always, come from China, 320 megawatts. This, probably blows a little bit the minds what the sizes are, but this is, how big the technology can grow, and also in a modular also way, as you can see. Well, those are the more typical floating water bodies, lakes, reservoirs, anything man-made, sometimes also nature. And we also have near-shore floating PV. So we are coming close to being at the ocean, but we are still, let's say, close to the shore with more, well, let's say, easier conditions to develop the projects. So here you can see a project in Singapore also. It is, I guess, between Singapore and Malaysia, 5 megawatts. It has been visited quite substantially from ADB and also the member countries. And it shows that you can actually develop this type of projects in a marine environment. The second one in the Seychelles, it's actually first than the one in Asia. So in this case, in Singapore, it's also a very interesting project, 4 megawatts, that, as you can see, was also developed in the nearshore environment. Well, we will be coming to the level of playing field that has been presented by my colleague, previous one. So we will be going to offshore. There are projects doing offshore floating. There are structures already in the sea for close to 10 years that have withstand 10-meter wave, that have withstand the winter of, Northern Atlantic, which is not at all easy. And we will be seeing these technologies coming forward. So there is a couple of examples here. So they will be coming to us, and I'm sure that, we will see also solar and floating going to the offshore world as well. So based on all of this, how do we actually link all of this with what matters to people? Livelihoods. How do they make money? How do they actually have a life? It is because no one eats electricity. So we have looked at the nexus between electricity, food, water, and actually more than that, also mobility, transportation, circular economy, things that matter to the lives of the people. And in the Pacific, this is what matters. These people are surrounded by water for centuries, but now they can actually harness the power of the water beyond just the fish and be able to then create opportunities and socioeconomic opportunities for them. So well, not okay. So how do we do this? And this was the challenge. This was actually what was asked to us. How do we combine floating PV and we combine all of these challenges, all of these needs? So we want to provide electricity for desalination. Water can become storage as well. So they can actually desalinate more during the day, desalinate less in the evening. You save and you better utilize the electricity. Everything becomes actually more in tune and also cheaper. The second one, transportation, clearly looking at hydrogen. We can have a huge hub in the Pacific. They are the ones with water. Everyone talks so much about green hydrogen, but the ones with water are the ones in the Pacific, not in the middle of the desert in Northern Africa. There's no water there. So there is definitely challenges. They have it there. The other one is mobility. Some of us have been fortunate to visit these islands and seen, why do they need cars? It's very small. Why do they need, motorbikes? They do need mobility, as we all do, but that could be done with electrical mobility. And there's so many opportunities, so many business models out there based on mobility. So if we actually provide electricity to them and provide charging station linked with batteries, then we can have those and enable those potential business models. That's not helping us today. Okay, so oops, now it's wow, there it goes. We just gotta click to the end. Yep. Okay, so we came up with, okay, nearshore works, but we have hurricanes, we have severe weather events, we have ondulation, we have conditions beyond what these technologies allow. So we came up with a concept, that's the one we are piloting, that involves floating PV, involves a wave breaker, and involves a regenerated reef, an electrically powered reef. Might have some of you sound like this is really science fiction. It is not. It exists. So we can actually regenerate reefs rebuild them and maintain them over time with electricity. So the electricity that they are actually enabling, it's also the same electricity that will actually make sure that the artificial reef is available. So you have seen here the concept. This is what we'll be doing. So bio-rock type of structures. Then we'll have a wave breaker, and then we have our floating structure. So we believe with that, we probably covered most of the challenges associated with nearshore. This is an example. It's coming in Kiribati. There's a similar example coming in Tuvalu. Tender will happen hopefully this year for construction in 2024. Nothing is for the future, it's just happening. We are finalizing procurement to come actually out in the market for this and to showcase in the Pacific and also to other island countries and other places in the world. So why is this a game changer in the Pacific? Land is scarce. It's all about rooftops, but here you have the option to do utility scale size next to the load. This is unheard of. And this is really, really changing the landscape and the opportunities that will actually come in terms of scaling up technology and also keeping the costs low, because this is also another important aspect. It can be accelerate the solar PV penetration. Everyone knows how difficult it is to go rooftop by rooftop, rooftop by rooftop. It is not an easy process. Here you can have 4 megawatts, 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts, which is huge in terms of number of rooftops that actually is equivalent to. We can have improved marine conditions at the FPV site because we are going to bring a regenerated reef. This will bring an ecosystem, will bring fish. It will provide livelihood opportunities for the people as well. And of course, it delivers all the opportunities that I mentioned on the Nexus, which will enable people to actually have access to better economy and better opportunities. Last but not least, and everyone has mentioned that, low to no environmental and social impacts. So we will not be displacing people, will not be actually affecting livelihoods, we will be improving environment and improving social livelihoods. Thank you very much.
I told you it was really good. Thanks, Agostino. I was just going to, I great opportunity to correct you. It's not low or no, it's actually regenerative. So we talk about sustainability like, oh, you know, we need to sustain where we are, but we aren't really doing a very good job. When we can regenerate, we can create more fish stocks, we can reduce ocean acidification. That I think is a fantastic aim. And I really applaud you and Cindy and your team for the work you've done on that TA. So now we're going to go to the panel discussion, and I would like to remind you that the app allows you to ask questions, or you can come and ask a question up here. But I'm going to call to the tables all of our speakers and Dr. Micah Bundo, who is the Marine Renewable Energy Specialist on my TA, TA 16619, which is talking about a lot of the stuff that Agostino talked about. So Mike, can I ask you to just give your thoughts as a start off on what you've seen today and just some commentary on that?
Thanks, Steve. Morning, everyone. So it's really interesting that we have some marine renewable energy technologies in the session. I'm specifically very happy that we spoke about productive use as well, which are obviously very relevant for archipelagic nations, small island developing states, being large ocean states as well. There is a spectrum of technology applications, and we talk about appropriate technologies that are suitable. So when you speak of grid scale markets, there is a market differentiation and a technology differentiation that comes into play. For large scale markets, so for grid connected markets, we talk about megawatt scale, and that's good. We had examples from the tidal technology. Andritz Hydro spoke about it. RedStack also spoke about large megawatt scale. But if we look at the island nations and you talk about electricity on the islands, it might be overkill to look at very large scale technology. So there is a microgrid size capacity that we need to also address. And so those that are maybe prototype versions, as I think one of our colleagues mentioned, 300 kilowatt. That's actually maybe the full island requirement already for some nations. So that spectrum is important to be aware of. And there are markets that probably have productive use as the strategy to scale. That means beyond just island electrification, going towards productive uses, transport, electrification of boats, synergies with aquaculture, water production. Those are all very important, and it will reach a certain scale. And if we're creative enough, this is where the green hydrogen production becomes a bit more relevant into the megawatt scale, large scale. So there's an opportunity for real socioeconomic development beyond just island electrification and small scale productive use. There's opportunity to export. And I think for the marine, aquaculture, reefs, renewable energy, for ecosystem, for ecotourism, and for ecosystem services, which is a very long title for the project that Steve spoke about. Short acronym is MARES. That looks at this regenerative marine industry mindset. And I feel like we've covered the technology side. There are a few more marine renewable energy technologies mentioned, obviously, wave, for instance, ocean thermal energy conversion. And so there's a whole suite of them that are going to be part of the energy mix if we see pilot projects, demonstration projects move forward. And the optionality is just as important. Now that we have these technologies coming online, even though they have different technology readiness levels, it's important for us to be aware that the combination and optimization of that mix will lead to the most resilient configuration, and couple that with the market's productive use and such. I think it's going to make the goal of sustainable development be reached in an accelerated manner. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Mike. That goes to the question of use, right? What is the use that you can generate? It's not actually the raw cost of the power, but it's actually what does that power let you do, and what does it let people in the community do? Agostinho, could I ask you a question? Because we still haven't got anybody asking questions. I'm a bit disappointed, actually. You guys need to ask more questions. Agostinho, could I ask you to expand a bit more on the ability for power and the need and the desire for people to improve their lives? I know you touched on your presentation, but could you show some examples like what you're working on in your research on your TA?
Yes. So one of the key areas that we looked at, tried to look at aquaculture first, and secondly, also mention was electrical vehicles, and the third one was water. So those were the three key ones. Giving specific examples, Kiribati is developing, as it would be expected, desalination plants. And so we thought about how about coupling the desalination plants with floating PV so that we could desalinate more, as I mentioned, during the day, and avoid spending more investment in terms of batteries, so that we could actually match better the utilization of solar and at the same time still be able to, of course, provide water to people. Aquaculture-wise, we try to actually co-locate with the floating PV aquaculture rings, aquaculture projects, in both in Tuvalu and Kiribati. Unfortunately, that was not possible because of their own plans, but the idea was that we could somehow pilot a structure where below the floating PV, we could actually take care of growing and farming of fish, and also fish that could actually provide a livelihood and very interesting, I would say, selling opportunity for the local people. And that's also something that interests them. And co-linked with that, we actually now are thinking about, of course, the needs for ice. ice and cold storage is very important in these islands, and even more in smaller islands, which are, we usually call them the outer islands. So if you fish and you have no way of maintaining that fish, it just rottens and it doesn't have any value. So the moment that you actually have that opportunity, you don't only have the opportunity to again store electricity, but the opportunity to provide a livelihood opportunity for women, for communities that are able to then, of course, manage better the stocks and the fishing, and also have the opportunity to have better lives. The fourth pillar was on electrical vehicles and electrical mobility. So in the case of Kiribati, we focused more on land vehicles. So of course, Kiribati, for some of you not very familiar, South Tarawa, more or less from one side, the airport to Besso, 35 kilometers. So it's a very small, let's say, range, clearly doesn't have any anxiety on electrical vehicles. And so we would like to again power that and be able to charge electricity from the floating PV and then be able to charge cars during the day. This is new for some of you. This is not going to be charging in the evening. There's no interest whatsoever in charging cars in the evening in these islands. It has to be done during the day. In Tuvalu, we are actually looking at boats. So we have a situation in Funafuti where students come to Funafuti to school. And obviously they come by boat. That boat uses diesel. So now we will be changing that to electrical boats. So that will be a cleaner trip for them. And it's one that happens every day, of course. And also the same thing goes for commuting to other nearby islands to Funafuti. So we hope again that the boats can be a good way in terms of mobility and also a way to charge and to actually direct the production of the FPV into again charging stations and batteries that can be again used during the day and not during the evening. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Agostino. And I think the point is, yep, sure, Juliet, just 2 secs. One of the things is that a lot of these countries pay a lot of money for importing fuel, right? So when you're replacing things with, local energy assets, you have to pay for the equipment, but it has a big impact on capital payments and gets people out of debt. So instead of having to spend money, they're actually making their own money and creating their own wealth, which I think is also highly virtuous. Juliet from the European Investment Bank.
Is this better? Yes, exactly. So when I listen to all of your stories, and I've seen many of these project proposals before, they make perfect sense. Technology has been around forever. There's less impact on land. The costs seem to be lower, etc. And still these projects are not taking off. And so as an investor, I always see that there is a lack of regulation. And so my question is to all of you, why is it that governments don't seem to be as interested in ocean as in the normal land-based solar?
Sea blindness.
Maybe I answer it. Good question. Yes. The problem of governments is always to think about legislation periods. So they have no long-term vision. I think also one issue in the past was that energy production was simply too cheap based on fossil. So it's every new technology, every new kind of producing energy costs money. So it needs subsidies from the government to start projects. And when you come to a commercial scale, it will live on its own, like in other technologies. We have seen in the wind parks was the same 30 years ago in PV panels. Yeah. So I think it's mostly hindered by the governments and they having not enough visions and strategies on this. That is my opinion.
But we're seeing a positive change here. We have government of Sri Lanka amongst the audience paying attention to this. So we can expect something to change.
I know, just a quick comment on that. I think, being from Europe as you. We started it feeding tariff, and this was the spark of everything we know today of renewable energies. I worked in renewable energies since 1999, when I'm one of the young guys. The old guys were from the 80s and 70s, and they, did small projects. That's what we did all our lives until feeding tariff came. So I think Asia has taught us something very valuable. VGF, variable, viability gap funding. This is what we need. This is what we need to do in Europe. Not feeding tariffs, but viability gap funding. We have excellent examples. And this would make things not very expensive, because unfortunately Europeans think that renewables were expensive. And now we are stuck with the problem that my colleague Norbert mentioned, costs. So yes, solar is very cheap. Wind is very cheap onshore. So if you go offshore, it's more expensive. If you do floating offshore, it's more expensive. So you go to the problems that you mentioned. So maybe it's time we also take some learnings from Asia and implement that in Europe and other markets. That may be a better option than actually the feeding tariffs, and enable these technologies and give them an option, because clearly now they struggle to get an option.
Just gonna add on that. I didn't know Gita was from USAID and you were from Sun Business. Maybe that's a mistake there on the slide. But so Steve mentioned sea blindness, Dan mentioned precisely. I think the answer to your question, primarily, there's a lack of awareness. There's really a lack of awareness from government. Ocean energy, what the heck is that? Blue economy. We don't understand the green just yet, but now we talk about blue economy. So there is really a lack of awareness. Even though they may genuinely want to listen, many sources of information tell them different things. And this is where knowledge, dissemination, sharing, etc., bit of training, capability development really goes a long way. The moment that they understand it, maybe in the language that they're supposed to understand it, they start opening up the possibility of maybe a strategy, maybe the linkage, understanding that, it's not about just PPAs, gap funding, that's good. It's not just about the economic stuff and sort of the electricity rates that come back in. What about the socio-economic benefits that are enabled by electricity and the business models around transportation, water production, aquaculture, the livelihoods that are basically spurred on by these things? If governments understand these a little bit better, I think it would be a little bit counterproductive for them not to consider good regulatory policy, legislation, etc. So I think we need to give a little more education, information, communication campaigns towards all stakeholders, actually, not just governments. Even the finance sector needs to understand this better too. So.
Thank you, Julia. Please, could you say who you are and ask your question?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Pereira with the World Resources Institute, and I live in the United States, where the Inflation Reduction Act has just been passed. So first, you guys all need to be talking to the DOE loan program. I'm not with the government, but the DOE loan program, they're trying to put $350 billion into new technologies. So definitely reach out to them. I don't bring the money. I just know the people who have the money. So maybe that's just as good. But my big question is, this is all a really interesting set of technologies, but I'm thinking about the workforce that you need to make all this work. I mean, what are you seeing from that side in terms of the availability of workers who can do these kinds of projects, install the technologies? What kind of workforce do you need? Can you take the natural gas industry, some of that skill set to repurpose for this? We're trying to think about the transition issues, and how are you guys seeing the workforce, the availability of workforce, and what kind of labor force do you need, and can that be repurposed from the fossil fuel industry?
I have a very short answer to that. So in the Asia Pacific region, we don't have a shortage of workforce. The reason we are competing with the rest of the world is that we are actually able to provide skilled manpower. So we don't feel that workforce is going to be a problem if we are developing these kind of projects. The problem is that the acceptance coming from the financial institutions, from the investors, from the government to create policies favoring these kind of projects. So that's my short answer.
Well, for our technology, I mean, for the tidal range power stations, it's very simple. You need the same workforce as for any other hydropower station. So it's construction works, it's electromechanical works, it's installation work. So this is nothing new. For the tidal stream turbines, it's very simple because the equipment is pre-assembled. You will ship it with a special vessel and you will put it on the ocean bed. So the shortage is here more the availability of the ship, yeah, due to also offshore wind projects. They're using, I think, more or less the same equipment, but there is no rocket science behind. So it is easily to use existing stuff from the mechanical electrical industry, from the construction industry.
On top of upskilling current workforce, at least for the Asia Pacific, there is also a mindset shift here. So the European, more Western folks, which have maybe mature oil and gas industries, they do have offshore engineers available and people understand what it means to work offshore. Not so in most of these archipelagic countries, not just yet. And the mindset shift is that when people look at deployments of ocean energy technologies, maybe going big means larger installation vessels, dynamic positioning vessels, and all that. And the supply chain here probably is not as mature where you have these large vessels, which cost $100,000 per day to deploy. We do have small fishing boats and tugboats. And so the appropriate size of deployment, modularity, and the scalability narrative is a little bit different. There are available skilled workforce that understand the marine environments, but not as mature as those with already offshore engineering. So to your point, we do need to upskill our engineers here to learn about the marine environments and how harsh or how unlike they are to the land environments. And just looking at one project we did in Indonesia, off-grid area, they wanted to do a tidal and solar combination on a floating barge. We worked with their local supply chain. They did have mechanical engineering and technicians available. They did know how to connect back to shore from 100 meters away, but they didn't do it with an underwater cable. They went through the air because that's what they knew how to do, with a pile in the middle. So that seemed to work for them, but that's a local solution. So there's a tweaking made available. And unless they understand that, oh, what are the pros and cons of a through the air cable than an underwater cable, they'll probably go with, we've seen this work with our jetty, with whatever else. This will work. And they know how to maintain that, So that's important too, the operation maintenance, the presence of supply chain. So there is a little bit of tweaking that needs to happen. And now I'm a little bit scared because offshore wind in the Philippines is up and coming. We do not have offshore engineering as mature in the Philippines sort of university or technician sector, etc. We don't. And we need to start thinking about that now. Otherwise, we'll always be importing folks and getting expertise from outside. Not saying that's a bad thing, but we do need to localize and train the workforce here. And I'm glad that you mentioned that point, and because there is an opportunity there to import technology, but also import know-how, and maybe the local content will not be just limited anymore to, oh, you general contractor kind of thing, subcontractor kind of thing. I think development needs to be as inclusive as well, to allow people to gain the knowledge and skill sets required for them sooner or later, not only to operate and maintain these things, but maybe to think about how in the first instance could they be involved in the front-end engineering design, detailed engineering design, and be part of that supply chain and delivery team. So,
Agostino, do you want to say anything, or you're okay?
Fine. I was thinking about, Kiribati and Tuvalu, and I think they would all be very happy if their diesel gen sets just don't run at all, and they just have to take care of floating PV and batteries. I think they will all be very much happier than they are right now, living in next to these very, very noisy machines and polluting ones. But again, very Pacific kind of oriented view. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Agostino. We actually had a conference in Kuala Lumpur in the start of February, and we had some discussions with Malaysian government. I think there's some Malaysian people in the audience. There was one question from Zaki, I think, who put if he's still here, that there are a lot of people, there's a lot of money in oil and gas. So the talent goes where the money is, right? So Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand have, and to a lesser degree, Vietnam, have quite good energy and gas sectors. So there's a lot of talented people and engineers in that space. And, whether we can entice them across is obviously how much money they're going to make out of it. It's a market, right? But I think Mike's point about how do we actually upskill people and get them to the point where they can make that transition is another challenge. But it's funny, I commonly hear things about the Pacific that people say, oh, they don't have the skills, people go off island. Well, I suppose if there was more money to be made on island, they'd stay. And so I think the issue is how we can help create those industries that keep people in places where they can contribute to the community instead of making people technically poor. Please go ahead, say who you are and your next question. You're next. Can you come up to the mic after you?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm from ICEM, a environmental consultancy based in Hanoi. Agostino, I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts first on, you mentioned nearshore floating solar. We're very interested in floating solar. In the nearshore area with a whole lot of wave energy, does that impact on power generation with the movement of the panels? And secondly, I guess you get this question quite a bit. I would love to understand the survivability of floating solar. What are the upper limits where those installations can survive? Have you seen some examples of installations that have now been through storms and you understand how tough they are or where they need to be strengthened more? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, that is the question. So we looked at data for all of this. So basically, in starting, all these island states have a common feature. They have lagoons. So they, as you might think, all of these are located on top of volcano ridges, which have in the middle the volcano, which now is a lagoon, and outside we have what is called the ocean. So we are looking at the lagoon side, which by definition has calmer conditions than the ocean side. Still, it's not free, it's not a lake. And we benefited a lot from SPC in the region and the models that they have developed of these lagoons to understand in return periods of 20, 50, 100 years, what are going to be the wave conditions that this structure will have to face. So we could even look at P99 situations and see what actually we'll have to face. That is why you saw the concept that we have a wave breaker and we also have a reef. So the reef it's a multi-purpose facility, and it was designed with a multi-purpose idea. One, of course, regenerate the ecosystem, rebuild the ecosystem, help developing more places for fish and everything that comes with fishing, with the fish livelihoods or linked livelihoods. The second was coastal protection. It will impact coastal protection positively. And third, it is the natural way to protect anything. That's how nature protects coasts. It's by having these reefs. As we know, it absorbs energy. So we wanted in, let's say, the highest risk situations that this reef could actually absorb the energy. And in the other ones, we would actually make do with the wave breaker. So you might probably, and if I can give you the exact data, 3 to 4 meter wave, which is actually the highest we have in these places, we tend to absorb with the reef. So that was the design. In 2 to 3 meters, the wave breaker will help. And below 2 meters, or it's 1 meter is not a big issue. Floating solar can actually withstand those conditions. Even though that is true, the wave breaker will again reduce that ondulation and also that the impact it will have on the floating structures. So that was based on that. We actually designed the concept that we have. You know, some of you may think, well, you're being too conservative. Yes, I accept that. And we would like to see the local people. I was loving what Michael said about the overhead line as the local solution. I believe there's a lot that the local people will bring to these nearshore concepts, a lot, because I can see it, having been there, that, you know, there's things that we can do and things that they can adapt and simplify. So maybe the second and the third projects will be simpler, will be actually also more local with local solutions, and of course, learning from the existing ones. So I hope I have replied to your question.
Can I add just a couple of minutes? Yeah. So we think about floating solar as one system, you know, PV on top and the floating structure. If we decouple that for a little bit, floating structures, there is a way to design these floating structures to survive significant wave heights, as you mentioned, 4 or 5 meters, maybe even beyond. There are floating offshore platforms that are designed to withstand higher significant wave heights and, you know, extreme conditions. But if you think about the solar being put on top of those structures, a couple of failure modes that you could think of. One is obviously the solar that would break in this kind of wave conditions. And the other one would be that you'd have probably water sort of going on top of these solar and electronics, which is obviously not always a good mix. So looking at calmer areas as sites of interest, priority sites of interest like the lagoons makes a lot of sense. Although there are wave breaker technologies, not just passive ones, because you do have passive ones already available out there. Singapore has them installed to prevent erosion of parks, you know, for instance. You can also have actively absorbing wave energy converters as your wave breakers. So yes, there's a possible combination of deploying energy absorbers on the side of these floating platforms, which probably you're alluding to, the possibility of basically reducing the impact on the structures themselves. They might be a little bit also decoupled depending on your design, but there are solutions around this, but you take the natural features that are there, take advantage of them as much as you can, because that's the cheapest option at this point in time. So maybe we can speak a little bit more about other technological solutions around this, but the short answer is that if you respect nature and design according to what is in nature and learn from that, I think you'd probably be sort of ahead in terms of your project thinking.
Nature-based solutions, harnessing nature instead of trying to change it. Ed, please go ahead.
Thanks. First, my name is Ed Travis. I'm with Ocean Pixel and the University of the Philippines. First of all, I want to congratulate the panel on looking at not just the technical solutions, but also the emphasis on the socioeconomic aspects. I think that's a great starting point for all of these projects, and I think it's to be encouraged. My specific question is for Geeta regarding the RED technology. I do quite a bit of work in hydrogen production, and I'm familiar with the various technologies like PEM and others, which are sort of the inverse of what you're doing. And I know that the water quality is a very important feature in order to achieve the maximum efficiency. And when you talk about brackish water, you're typically talking about water which isn't really very pure. There are a lot of suspensions and turbidity and other issues. And my question is really twofold. How does your technology deal with these kinds of imperfections? And number two, does this lead to a number of maintenance issues in terms of cleaning membranes, et cetera?
So we are only generating electricity. We are throwing out the brackish water back into the ocean. So we're not using the brackish water. So we're only filtering the fresh water and the seawater before we flow it through our modules, membranes. And that's how we are able to reduce the operations and maintenance cost, because these were the challenges we faced the first time we were trying to install the pilot project. So we have now overcome all of that. If you're thinking of using the brackish water, which is going out, which we are currently leaving it back into the ocean to be used for green hydrogen production, then there are two levels of purification further required. One would be to desalinate the fresh, the brackish water, and the second would be to go to a module which can produce ultra pure water, which is what is required for green hydrogen production. So there'll be two more levels of technology to be implemented.
So there's no cleaning of the brackish water before it is used by the RED technology.
So we are using salt water and fresh water. We're cleaning the salt water. So there are two levels of filtration that we do before we release it into the membranes. One is the filtering, where we filter out the solids, which is higher than 30 micrometers.
Okay.
And then there is a dual sand filtration process through which we filter out the second level of the water filtration that we do. And then the filtered water from the dual sand filtration system goes into the membranes.
Understood.
So we filter all of that, but the out product is brackish water, which is released back into the ocean.
Thank you.
Yep, that's why they have 25% plant cost, because they need the energy to do that. Please, the next question. Please identify yourself and ask your question.
My name's David Knight. The question I have is also for Gita. We were talking about desalination. I think Agostino mentioned using power for desalination. Your product from desalination is you get a very high saline content in your discharge water. I know your process was freshwater and seawater, but can the same process be used from a higher concentrate saline solution to seawater? So basically we're taking the output from the desalination plant using your seawater, and will you still be able to generate electricity?
That will not be possible because we need fresh water. So the high concentration coming out from desalination plants can be the salt water source for us. We would still need a freshwater source. So, and the higher the salinity content of the saline water, the better it is. So the discharge coming out from the desalination projects is actually much better for us, but we still need freshwater source. So we cannot have the desalination projects also coexist with the RED projects.
Thank you.
Just comment on that. So the desalination plants in Singapore, they do energy recovery from the high concentration byproduct, and they do use that byproduct as the salty water. And for Red Stack, you're saying that you still need fresh water, but you can't use the seawater and remove the salt and use that as the fresh water. I mean, there is a energy ratio here, obviously, but so
it ultimately boils down to the cost. So
Yeah,
if we are
understood.
to desalinate the water first, then there is a cost, and then to produce electricity. So we're going in a loop,
Yeah.
wasting a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that is not the right solution.
3 laws of thermodynamics. Rule 1, best you can do is break even. Actually, first rule is you can't win. Second rule is you can only break even. And third rule is rule 1 normally applies. Okay, so Al, question from you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Ed Rahal, and I work on a USAID project in Bangladesh. My question on floating solar is, what kind of data collection methodology did you use to determine the benefits derived, the environmental benefit for, the fish and so forth? And also, is there a minimum requirement for the size of the solar panels to derive some of those benefits, or any sizes works? Thank you.
Well, we are to monitor that. I think what you are asking is what we will be defining of the project is to see exactly what are the positive impacts that it will bring. So what we have harnessed so far is, of course, the very good results of BioRock in more than 400 locations around the world. And this is something that it's tangible. So we've seen it creates sand, or basically fixed sand. It brings fishes. and of course creates opportunities linked to the ecosystem restoration. We want to see that. So that's something that we'll be monitoring, of course, within ADB safeguards and also the projects. In terms of sizes, of course, and Michael has mentioned, the sizes of the islands are small compared to, what we are looking at. So we don't probably going to do 320 megawatts as the Chinese are doing in China, but we are looking at sizes that should be 1 megawatt above. And this is what we are looking also on the other islands as opportunities. But for smaller islands, we can also do 100, 200, 300 kilowatts. So floating is substantially scalable. And the matter, of course, is going to be a little, of course, on the cost, as Stephen has mentioned. But there is, let's say, no minimum. And there's something that we can do in every, and we have examples. And so those can actually provide benefits in small scales and, let's say, more this island scale also types with the megawatts. But that's more or less the scales that we're talking about.
Hi, did you want to ask a question? Please come to the microphone and say who you are.
I'm one of the high school students visiting like this entire week, and I really like the presentation you guys gave. Thank you so much. But I wanted to ask, are these only open for like countries that have access to like oceans? And is it available for like countries who are like landlocked or don't have access to like oceans?
Very good question. And that actually goes to, we had a big argument about 3 years ago about RTA that Mike and I worked on and Dan worked on, because we used the term littoral, which meant that that was near shore, something that had access to the sea. But a lot of these technologies, and I'm going to ask all three of you, what are the technologies that can be used by countries that are not, don't have access to salt water?
So we will be not able to implement RED projects because we need salt water and fresh water together.
But what if you had a inline saline lake, like in the middle of the United States?
Yeah, so we can explore all of that. But unless there is an availability of salt water, we cannot put up RED projects.
Okay, Norbert?
Well, we talked about ocean energy, so we need tidal hub or we need tidal stream for this kind of technologies. But of course, the normal hydropower station, so to say, you can build everywhere where you have a mountain and a river.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Just let me just quick comment. When I was a student like you, I used to work essays about globalization. Everything was closed. Now everything is open. A landlocked country needs to invest in integration, regional integration, have access to ocean technologies. That's how the world needs. We are all brothers and sisters. There's no other way. Floating is better. It works quite well on lakes. So landlocked countries that have lakes, clearly can benefit from floating solar, as many are. And in some of them actually become quite a very interesting opportunity, especially those that have a lot of mountains, especially those that don't have actually so much land. So that would be my answer to you, maybe integration and of course, lakes for floating.
I kind of agree with what they all said, but technology sometimes, there is an adaptability to them. In fact, when Andritz, they are doing hydrokinetic turbines, which may not have started with the ocean. It started with the rivers, but it's flowing water. So that's important to understand. What is the resource that you're harnessing? So it's flowing water. Okay, it's landlocked. It's okay as long as there's flowing water. I need salt water for red stack. If there's salt water from a lake, salt water from somewhere else, doesn't need to be the sea, then I could do red stack. If there's somewhere to place floating PV, it could be a lake, or in the Philippines, we have hydro energy reservoirs as well. So we could put it there too. So I think it's the technology suitability and adaptability that you could use and learn from. And I'm glad that you opened it up, because it's an unusual question, but definitely
I
good
think
one
it's
to
a
ask.
great question and I applaud you because can I ask you a question? How old are you? 18? Wow. Okay.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
okay, you're right. So you're almost 16. Okay. Hey, great question. Because sometimes we need to reverse look at things, and I'll finish off this panel with one comment that we sometimes refer to the Pacific as having poverty. And it's funny, I've been at ADB for 5 years, and our objective at ADB is to fight poverty, to fight climate change, to support regional cooperation and integration, which means gets countries to be together and go to Agostino's point, build peace through interdependence. So when you look at some of these problems, you say, oh, this is what you see. But in fact, you look at the Pacific, my time in the Pacific, I find it extremely rich places, tremendous resources, fantastic cultures. And by using some of these technologies, we suddenly realize that, oh, these are the people with all the resources, right? They've got the water, they've got the fish, they've got all this enormous energy potential. So I think that was a really good question because you helped frame that final comment I wanted to make. So thank you. I'd like to thank our panel because we've run out of time. We have no more questions. There was a question about price, and I sort of, what's the difference in price? We're actually publishing a book on that, which is coming out as soon as we can get it through our internal processes. But that will talk exactly to the differences in prices and where they will be. So on that note, I'd like to thank the panel, and if you could give them a round of applause. And also to thank you for being such a great audience and asking some really good questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. See you back in half an hour.
And stand with you here, on the floor. So good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Cisneros Chanco. I'm a principal energy specialist with the ADB. And I think my name got mentioned several times in the morning session. Apologies for that. Steve is plugging for me. He is my campaign manager for my TA 6680 on Floating Solar Plus projects. And I've met some of you also in Malaysia during the MARIS forum. So I'm really glad to see familiar faces and also some really interesting technologies from this morning. I learned a lot, from salinity gradient to tidal to wave to offshore wind. I think these are very exciting technologies that I am also looking into to probably support in the ADB, over the next medium or even long term. So these are really exciting things that are happening. And this, second half of this session, we are going to hear from experts in their field on, well, Dan is calling it floating clunkers, floating vessels, and then we hear about wave technology, and then tidal. And of course, our very Assistant Secretary for MINDA will talk about stitching them all together in terms of technologies and financing. So it's really going to be very exciting. And I look forward to your questions to make it an even engaging conversation. So first up, I'd like to call on Dan Millicent to talk about cash for floating clunkers, a Gigatech solution for our Teraton problem. Dan Millicent is manager of Planet C LLC. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Cindy. So this, the idea I'm going to talk about, it started a long time ago, but really started to crystallize under the MARIS TA, trying to help Steve and team do some work. So let me dive right in. Joke now. Okay, so we have big problems that we're trying to solve, and we're not doing a very good job of solving them. We were talking about climate change, we're talking about net zero, and we tend to talk about that in isolation. There's a much bigger problem that's the biodiversity crisis, also known as the sixth great extinction, and it includes Homo sapiens. So and Steve mentioned earlier, sustainability versus regeneration. So we need regenerative solutions, and that's what I'm gonna talk about. And just to get a little better sense of the scale of the of the problem that we're trying to solve, the problems that we're trying to resolve, right? We do not have until 2030. That is not correct. We lost the war on climate change in 2009. That's when we reached the tipping point for coral reefs, for tropical coral reefs. And if we want to get back and address ecosystem services, we have to regenerate ecosystem services. And to get back to a healthy balance with a healthy ocean, we need to remove, not offset with fake credits. We need to remove 1 trillion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere and the oceans. And the sooner we do that, the better. Now, you may think, oh my God, we'll never be able to afford this. We can. The money's there. There's money for the project, but there's a project for the money. So our prototype, Cash for Floating Clunkers, we homed in on an opportunity in the Marshall Islands with the Majuro Energy Company. And the idea is to convert the existing onshore bulk fuel storage facility to a floating storage and offloading operation. And ADB is providing financial support to rehab the existing onshore bulk storage facility, which is 40 years old. And I don't know how they even keep anything in the tanks, because half of them have giant holes in them right now. And so this is a great project, but it was conceived back about, investment decisions were effectively made on this tank farm rehab in 2017. And a lot's happened since then. And this is a great project, but it's an interim solution. And what's really needed for the long term is to go to a floating storage and offloading operation that's in the lagoon, where it's not going to be exposed to the waves. And when we get that floating storage unit in there, you're not going to know it's there. Now, here's a question, right? If you can find the floating tanker in that picture on the right, you have a future in ocean energy. Okay, so what's the big idea? Jamie Leather on Tuesday morning mentioned Cash for Clunkers, that he seemed to believe that it originated when Obama was president. It goes back to the early 90s or even earlier. Okay, so the idea is we take advantage of the International Maritime Organization compliance regime, which, unlike the Paris Climate Accord, IMO regulations are enforced. They are enforceable and they are enforced. So if you own a ship today, by 2030, you've got to reduce the emissions from that ship by 40%. And by 2050, you got to reduce it by 70%. If we do a Cash for Clunkers model, Cash for Floating Clunkers in this case, our normal BAU case is that we scrap the ship, send it to the shipyard, Panamax class vessel, we get $5 million for it as scrap. So instead of sending it to the shipyard, we repurpose it. But how do we pay for the repurposing? We effectively monetize the avoided GHG emissions of the avoided fuel burn of, if we do at least 10 years early retirement of a Panamax class vessel, we pick up a net CO2, avoided CO2 of 400,000 tons CO2 equivalent. And if we can monetize that at $50 per ton, we have $20 million in our pocket to start with, instead of having to go beg for grant money or go borrow money or go find some other investor or whatever. Now, there's no CDM type methodology today to do this, at least not that I know of. So we need some kind of other financial instrument. And that's what, there are other climate funds to do this, like the climate investment funds, the clean technology fund and scaling up renewable energy program. So now we have that money. Let's say we get this $20 million and we need to spend, maybe we have to spend $1 million or $2 million to convert the vessel. So in this case, in Majuro, the first thing we do is refit it for the floating tank farm operation. So floating storage and offloading, and we can add solar to the top side of the vessel. We can also add wind to the top side of the vessel. The wind in the Majuro Lagoon is really good, and the wind tends to blow at night when the sun isn't shining. And then depending on the actual depth of the water and how big the vessel is and how much electricity we actually have from our solar and wind, or maybe we can hook on some in-stream tidal, we can hang other stuff onto the ship. So we can do reef cultivation, which will support regenerative marine aquaculture, and that can literally be hanging off of the ship. We can do other, the marine aquaculture can include shellfish, seagrasses, and maybe some other fish. But we're when we do seagrasses and shellfish, we're sequestering carbon. So we have what's effectively a blue carbon farm. Now, if we're in deeper water, if we go into the deep end of the Majuro Lagoon, we might be able to add a deep water intake pipe so that we have no feed marine aquaculture. And the reference case there is Catalina Sea Ranch, offshore California. So the idea here is that, we start out with cash, and we talked about the cost earlier. We heard about the cost of doing offshore wind, and it looks expensive. It's expensive because we make it expensive. We hire an engineering firm and do a gold-plated design, and we're not trying to do duct tape, right? But we have a duct tape solution here, right? We can get the ship, refit it, and use the renewable energy for captive power generation and create revenue through the aquaculture operation. And in this case, in Majuro, we're going to start out doing the fuel storage and offloading operations. So I've tried to. So we're limited by our imagination here, right? But if we start out thinking about doing a power purchase agreement, we never arrive at this solution. So forget about PPAs. Think about power to X. This is where we add value. This is the productive use of the renewable energy. And if you're not familiar with ADB's Strategy 2030, let me assure you, power to X and this concept is 100% consistent with ADB's Strategy 2030, where electricity energy investment operations are inputs to other development objectives, operational priorities. And so trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we actually do this transaction? It's not really straightforward, especially because today, like, the tanker that I want to get is running oil in the ghost fleet for Vladimir Putin. All right, there's 600 tankers out doing that right now, and we're going to have a hard time getting the tanker today. Maybe next year would be a lot easier, right? So I've run through some simple valuation of different scenarios of how the transaction could be structured from the ship owner's perspective and from the Marshall's Energy Company perspective. And the second best scenario for each side is where the vessel owner donates the ship and forgoes the salvage value, and the vessel owner and Marshall's Energy Company split the carbon credit revenue. So whether we can make that happen remains to be seen. It's up to the government and the Marshall's Energy Company to really decide to push forward. But there is interest in doing this project there. And once we get beyond the first project, I've sketched out a way that we could scale this up using a little bit of soft money to get started. And then we would use that money to crowd in investment. And this is kind of a variation of crowdfunding that's actually based on a business model that used to be quite common in the offshore oil and gas industry for speculative seismic surveys done in advance of offshore leasing rounds. So we can come back to this in the Q&A period if you want. And hey, look, this is my best idea. If someone's got a better idea, I'm all ears. So Maras, just add money, make those checks payable to Dan, not Daniel Millicent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. The next two speakers will talk about wave energy in Vietnam. Ms. Georgia Yordanescu, Senior Lead Specialist of Clean Energy at Development Alternatives, Inc., and Mike Stevens, Water Resource Management Specialist from the International Center for Environmental Management.
Thank you. Just let me get oriented real quick. Steve, nice job putting my name out there. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Hi everyone. Well, first of all, I want to thank ADB for the invite and for gathering this brain power this week to discuss how we get to be more committed to the clean energy transition. So I'm here today to talk about an example of how donor funding can help advance early stage technologies. But before I do so, I want to back up for a second and just put everything into perspective, because today we're wrapping the conference. So we're at the bookend of this event. So I thought I should just put it into the context of what we heard in terms of what's needed in this transition to clean energy, to net zero. So we heard a lot of buzzwords. I'm looking at my notes. Partnerships, funding, more funding, risk-taking, risk mitigation, go big, go small, mainstream technologies, niche technologies. So an ocean of opportunities, right? That's a pun. So what I like to draw attention upon is the fact that obviously we need to do everything we can possibly think of, plus some more, and fast. However, while doing so, we must not compromise on a few essentials. And number one that comes to mind is objectivity. Objectivity of decision-making processes, investing decision-making, government policy decision-making, and we'll get to that in a second. I should advance this. The second essential on which we must not compromise is commercial technical viability, because that's directly linked to financeability, investability. Dan put it earlier, the money's out there, you need the project. I would add an end to that sentence and say, and you need government support, and we'll speak to that in a second. And the other two things that we cannot compromise upon when we talk about transition to net zero, they are affordability and reliability. So with that in mind, let me tell you what I was researching this early AM. So there's an IRENA study in 2020 that assessed from the entirety of clean energy technologies, niche technologies, including tidal wave, marine technologies in general, will account for about 4% of the total energy mix in 2050. So that's roughly 900 gigawatts for global energy mix. So 4%, that's pretty small number. So what's the fuss all about, right? Well, there's reason, because not all geographies are created equal. And that's why we're here today, to see how we support niche technologies depending on location. So I wanted to keep this in perspective and see what we've learned from other technologies, primarily solar and wind. And is there anything different that needs to be considered when going about funding, scaling those technologies? So a couple of thoughts. These technologies, marine technologies, and the crowd here knows better, are considered niche, which means early stage, not all of them proven commercially viable, investable. And I also looked at other data points. The R&D, according to a recent study by the International Energy Agency, points that the R&D for marine alone is 1/10 of that of wind energy. So that's an interesting data point to keep in mind, because that contributes to the profile of risk of these technologies. So there are certain milestones a funder is looking at, and funders are not all equal. Obviously, there's private funding and there's donor funding, and I'm here to talk to you about donor funding and the role it plays in advancing these niche technologies. But I'd like to draw attention to the fact that while niche in their stage of development, the milestones are pretty similar with what we've seen other technologies need to go through. So USAID Invest is helping advance ideas. It helps address the challenges, the barriers to investment in various ways. The case study that my colleague Mike is going to present in a minute is about wave energy for a pilot project in Vietnam. And USAID Invest helped fund the environmental impact assessment. And why is that even important in this discussion? And here, by the way, are some metrics regarding overall this mechanism and what it does, how it works, type of partnerships, and happy to dwell on it more in Q&A afterwards should there be interest. Before getting to sort of this case study in Vietnam, would like to draw your attention to these numbers, and these are the recent numbers from March, actually, showing how catalytic donor funding can be in literally jumpstarting renewable energy development. And you will see that the bulk of the work is to advance climate finance activities. 73% of capital mobilized is in solar, microhydro, biomass, and this again is across geographies, not Asia alone. But just to give you a sense of the concentration of the demand and where we're supporting. So going back to what we've learned and how donor funding can help, donor funding is critical because it can help at the earliest stage when the risk is highest. Private money usually goes to R&D, as you all know, but there's not that much of an investable opportunity when you don't have anything but a concept. So for this reason, with donor money, we help inform the government, for example, on environmental impact assessments. And these are important. My colleague Mike will describe how important it is to know the good, the bad, and the ugly in order to make investable decisions. And I was going to talk about, more how this works. And then I remembered a question being asked earlier from the audience. Somebody from Europe, I don't see the lady here, but the question was why governments are not interested in pursuing these technologies. So my take on this is the question should be asked differently. What is it that the government knows about these technologies, and what is it that the governments need to know about these technologies? So the role that we play implementing USAID funded programs such as USAID Invest is, first of all, to rectify this information asymmetry in the market, providing objective, neutral, data-based points on technologies through ESIAs, for example. The other thing that we do is we help alleviate the burden of transaction costs, of early development costs for a developer. And once proven commercially viable, technologically viable, we work with the governments to create that enabling environment, which I'm happy to take questions about, should there be any, because as by way of conclusion, it is important to help jumpstart these early stage technologies with funder money, but it's not enough. There needs to be government support that meets the momentum, again, should the other conditions for these technologies be met. So that's in a nutshell, and I'll be happy to take questions. Turning it over, though, to my colleague Mike to tell you more about the case study in Vietnam.
We have the next slide, Joe. Okay, while that's in process. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike. I work for a company called ISEM. We are based in, fantastic. We are based in Hanoi, Vietnam. We were very lucky to work on an interesting project, as my colleague Georgia alluded to, on the potential development of a wave energy converter off the coast of Vietnam by INGEN. INGEN are a wave energy developer. Now, we're sort of taking the next step. We've heard from a lot of wonderful technology developers. We're sort of a supporting partner or carrying out a supporting process as they move to implement their projects. Our project focused on the environmental impact assessment, and it was part of a USAID initiative to explore and facilitate private investments in the renewable energy sector. Now, just before we go into the environmental impact assessment itself, why waves and why wave energy? Well, wave energy and wave energy converters are interesting compared to other forms of renewable energy. In some cases, they do have some interesting advantages potentially. Firstly, baseload. Typically, many of you will know, renewable energy is not typically considered baseload power. Wind and solar are often intermittent. They cannot always provide baseload power without a bit of baseload storage in there. Wave energy varies much more slowly than some other renewables like wind and solar, and it is also predictable over much longer periods. So wave energy, at the very least, is considered complementary to baseload power. The second point is that wave energy is incredibly dense. Imagine being at this beach. Imagine being in the swell and feeling those waves crashing and rushing around you. There is a hell of a lot of energy there concentrated in a very small area. And this energy density is very beneficial if you want to harness and collect that energy. Now, if we take that and we think about inhabited islands off the coast of Vietnam, a lot of the land is used for farming and housing. There is not a lot of space left, at least on the land, for large wind and solar installations, although I think some other colleagues might have some interesting ideas about what to put in the oceans next to some of these islands. But just thinking about the land aspect, wave energy, if we just think about the land aspect, a wave energy converter off the coast of an island can be a very good way to provide baseload renewable power for those communities. And then thirdly, linking in with that, a lot of these remote areas may not be connected to national energy grids, so it's a microgrid sort of a situation. Remote communities in Southeast Asia often have quite limited access to reliable power, as we know, and it impacts on the health, education, food security, livelihoods, and poverty reduction. And for those areas, wave energy can be one of the potential solutions. Now, I digress. I'm actually not here to necessarily say this is an incredible solution. I'm here to discuss the environmental impact assessment. We're sort of a middle process, and I'd like to share with you why an EIA is so important. Now, our company, ICEM, we assess and communicate ideas on climate change, on biodiversity, on energy, on water. We conducted the EIA for the proposed development, and an EIA primarily, as what many of you would understand, helps communities and governments to balance the needs of development with socioeconomics and the environment. But more than that, it's incredibly important. EIAs can help ensure that development aligns with government policy. It can also support investment decisions and ensure community involvement. And finally, in many cases, and in this case, it helps improve the design of these developments. Now, the EIA is a massive document. I'm obviously not going to go through it all. You'll all be asleep very quickly. But to go through some of the main points, we have, of course, determined the positive and negative impacts of the proposed development. Firstly, and unsurprisingly, Injin's wave energy converter would substantially increase the renewable energy supply for the island, decrease dependence on diesel fuels used for generators, and decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Along with that, the development would contribute to a higher volume of water being produced by the existing desalination plant, and this would be beneficial for tourism development on the island, which is incredibly important, and also more stable agriculture production, which is a key sector on the island. Now, going to the other side of it, this development is planned to be located in a marine protected area, and that does make determining and balancing the needs of development, socioeconomics, and the environment even more challenging for us. The likely key negative impacts are to the coastal zone and biodiversity, which may be affected during the construction phase when seabed construction activities may result in higher turbidity and water pollution. Also, the location of this wave energy converter might impede coastal reef observation basket trips. And this is an important tourism activity for people on the island. Now, I've gone from one side to the other side of impacts here. I would like to say that please keep in mind that the majority of impacts for this development are negligible or are very small, and they are localized. You've just seen sort of two opposite ends of the spectrum. Through the EIA process, we were able to highlight some challenges to wave energy, what may slow the uptake in Vietnam, at least. Firstly, policy. The Vietnamese government's policy on renewable energy, it does not mention wave energy specifically. It does not mention it at all. That absence made navigating bureaucracy and made even just talking to stakeholders about this technology incredibly challenging for INGEN and for ICEM. Secondly, and quite interestingly, climate change projections indicate that there is a decreasing average wave height for the development area in future. If you've got lower average wave heights, that means this plant would develop less power. However, we feel that given the forewarning INGEN has, they can enhance their design to adapt. So I guess this is a powerful message in why an EIA and why considering climate change is a very good thing to incorporate in your designs going forwards. Finally, and we've probably heard from quite a few people on the economics, as a less developed technology, wave energy converters have a relatively high levelized cost of energy, and that obviously reflects the cost per megawatt hour for the entire life of the project. Just quickly, thank you to the organizers for this lovely event. Thank you to DAI for supporting ICEM to join the forum, and thank you to you, the audience. I hope this has sparked a little bit of interest in wave power and provided a bit of understanding around EIAs.
Thank you, Mikey and Georgia. Our next speaker, Mr. Christian Gold Calibo, CEO of San Bernardino Ocean Power Corporation, will talk about the Couple Island Ocean Power Project, Tidal Energy. Over to you.
Good morning. On behalf of San Bernardino Ocean Power Corporation, I'd like to thank the ADB for giving us the chance to share with you the Couple Island Ocean Power Project, which aims to be the first operational ocean power project in the Philippines. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'd walk you through very quickly. Oh, sorry. Well, you might be wondering where this quote came from, which famous person uttered these words. He's not famous at all. ADB asked me for a quote from my own presentation, and so I had to come up with this. But at the end of my presentation, I will share with you a quotation from a truly famous person. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'll discuss with you what is tidal in-stream technology, which I think you've seen in previous presentations. What is the status of ocean energy in the Philippines? And I'll dive into our own Couple Ocean project, our implementation strategy, and the challenges that we've faced and continue to face in doing this project. So what is tidal in-stream technology? As you've seen previously, in essence, it's harnessing the flow of water to generate electricity. It's like putting a windmill underwater. And so instead of the wind driving the turbine, it's the stream, the current that drives the tidal turbines. This is a picture of a tidal turbine from the NREL, and this is by Verdant Power, which they implemented near New York City. Now, what is the potential for ocean energy in the Philippines? According to a study conducted in the 1980s, there is a theoretical potential of 170 gigawatts of energy generation in the Philippines. And pursuant to the Renewable Energy Act, the Philippine Energy Plan gave an installation capacity of 70.5 megawatts way back in 2013. And this was updated, but there was just a very slight change to 71 megawatts in the 2020 to 2040 National Renewable Energy Program. But what is the exact status of energy, ocean power energy in the Philippines? To date, there is zero installed capacity for ocean energy. And that is what we in San Bernardino aim to change in the near future. So let me now share with you our project. The Couple Ocean project is located between the islands of Luzon and Samar in the Philippines. It intends to make use of the current from the Pacific Ocean that goes through the Philippines down to Indonesia. And it is located to the east of Couple Island, as you can see in the diagram. What you don't see probably is that there is a small inlet, San Bernardino Strait, that is between Luzon and Samar, and that is where the tidal current passes through. This is a picture of Couple Island, relatively small, 35 square kilometers with a population of around 12,000 way back in 2020. As in many islands in the Philippines, the main source of livelihood is fishing and farming. What is the current supply in Couple Island? As with many islands, again, they're supplied with diesel, using diesel generators from the National Power Corporation. Their peak demand in 2020 was less than 500 kilowatts, and they're currently being serviced by Northern Samar Electric Cooperative. And despite the diesel generators being there up to full capacity, they still experience brownouts, frequent brownouts in the area. And for this project, we are aiming to install 1 megawatt of ocean power technology. So let me walk you through very quickly as to what we have done in the past years, more than 10 years actually from the time we got the service contract. We were awarded the service contract in 2013, and in 2014 to 2015, up to 2016, we did site studies, resource assessment, preliminary front-end engineering design, as well as a study on how to integrate the ocean power project into the distribution system in the island. In 2017, we conducted public consultations, of which we got favorable support from the local government and from the community. In 2018, significantly, we filed for a declaration of commerciality with the Department of Energy. And in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we were awarded the confirmation of commerciality by the DOE, which is the first for an ocean power project in the Philippines. In 2021, we conducted a distribution impact study, which is akin to a system impact study for the main grid. And this year, we're currently doing the EPC tender for this project and hopefully award the project, the EPC contract within the next 2 months, after which will be the start of detailed engineering and design. In 2024 to 2025, we're looking forward to closing the project financially and to start the manufacture and the installation and testing of the turbines and to start commercial operations somewhere in 2025 to 2026. So what is our implementation strategy? Since this is an off-grid project, there are two main ways of doing it under the current regulatory framework. We can do either a new power provider or a microgrid system provider. And the main difference between the two is that in a new power provider, we simply replace the generator, National Power Corporation, and power will continue to be distributed by the electric cooperative. On the other hand, as a microgrid system provider, we will be doing both distribution and generation and distribution of electricity direct to the end users. What are our challenges? So tidal in-stream is relatively new and with a limited track record for large-scale generation. So as you can see, our project is only for 1 megawatt, servicing a specific island, an island grid in the Philippines. Second is difficulty in resource assessment and verification. So We got our service contract in 2013. Unfortunately, in the end of 2013, Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. And for the first half of 2014, no boats would want to venture and do the studies with us. So it took us to start the verification from the middle of 2014 onwards. And it's not like solar where you can do a PVSys analysis desktop. You have to go there, you have to have divers, go underwater, do a bathymetric study, analyze the current, analyze the potential, and then match that with a technology that you can use to harness the resource in the area. High EPC cost because compared to other technologies, solar and wind, it's still relatively high. Although it's projected to go down in the near future, but it's still pretty much expensive, especially for a very small area and very small project. And finally, limited financing options because in the Philippines, there was no feed-in tariff and there remains to be no feed-in tariff for ocean, unlike wind and solar and biomass. And so this negatively impacts the bankability of the project. And while there are grants that are being offered by institutions like IRENA, NAMA, but you still have to go through the process. You have to defend the project, its feasibility, and it's something that we continue to do. And in the end, we might be financing this on our own as a development project internally. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll be sharing with you a slide from a famous person, Jacques Cousteau. And I think this encapsulates why we are here in this forum. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you very much, Christian. Very wise words indeed. Our next speaker is Assistant Secretary Romeo Montenegro. He is the Deputy Executive Director of Mindanao Development Authority. ASEC, please.
Good morning, everyone. As advocates of blue energy, blue economy, we all believe in diving deep into the heart of the matter. And what better way to do it than to figuratively dive into the oceans that divide us in today's session and discuss initiatives that harness our collective action towards the path to clean and sustainable energy future. I am from the Mindanao Development Authority, a government agency that is mandated to coordinate the integrated development of Mindanao, the Philippines' second largest island, and part of the Philippines that has been for the longest time regarded as the land of promise on account of its enormous opportunities and strengths, particularly in the agriculture sector. Half of my presentation essentially will delve into laying down the context of why Mindanao, as we lay down the premise that the way forward for blue energy in the Philippines is also very much viable to kickstart it in Mindanao. Now, on the Philippine setting and the Philippine context, a paper in 2017 titled Valuing and Managing the Philippines' Marine Resources Towards a Prosperous Ocean-Based Blue Economy by UP professor Rodora Azanza noted that the Philippines has a total coastline of 37,000 kilometers, longer than the coastlines of China, United States, and Japan. And reckoned with the latest estimates, the total coastal population of the Philippines is around 60 million, or 55% of its total population, covering more than half of the municipalities and cities. The said paper also cited that the Philippine marine ecosystems can contribute a conservative monetary value of nearly $1 trillion to the economy, much more if we factor in blue economy and blue energy. And yes, the San Bernardino project earlier cited validated such claim. Therefore, it underscored that with such span of encompassing fisheries, tourism, trade, energy, and other economic activities, it can be argued that blue economy potential could be tapped toward helping achieve the country's sustainable growth and inclusive development. And this is where Mindanao lies in terms of such opportunity. Well, Mindanao is made up of about only 400 islands out of over 7,100 islands all across the Philippines. Nonetheless, account for nearly half of the country's fisheries and aquaculture output. In fact, 3 regions in Mindanao account for nearly half of the country's entire production of fisheries. The largest sardines canneries and tuna canneries in the Philippines are located in Mindanao, with products exported to many countries, including the European market. Demonstrating its inherent strength in the agriculture and being the country's food basket, Mindanao over the years had also been able to put the Philippines on the map of a global map of high-value agricultural export commodities. When we talked about seaweeds, where Philippines is number 3 in the world, that's essentially Mindanao. In terms of tuna, where Philippines is 8 in the world, that essentially is a Mindanao commodity. However, in the last recent years, with the effects of climate change rearing its ugly head, and the global warming already having its impacts on our water, energy, food resources, the shocks of drought, typhoons, weather disturbances, bound to be happening in varying duration and intensity in the future. And so there's no better time to act than now, and hence our aggressive push towards energy transition, especially in Mindanao. Right now in Mindanao, aside from coordinating major development projects, such as roads, bridges, ports, and airports, pursued by the national government and funded by our ODA partners and private sector, Minda is also carrying out pilot projects supported also by our ODA partners and in collaboration with relevant agencies and local government units, including the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, to enhance innovation and transformation of our rural agricultural communities, guided by the water, energy, food nexus. This is in line with the espoused policy of the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to promote the use of renewable energy and continue investing heavily in technological innovation and human capital development to ensure productivity and competitiveness anchored on sustainability. We have started in Mindanao putting forward a few initiatives that lay the basis for scalable and replicable renewable energy projects that power the value adding of our agri-fisheries sector and promote transformation of off-grid, geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas in Mindanao. One such project, as an example, is a 1.8 megawatt solar hybridized with battery and complemented by the SPAG diesel of the National Power Corporation that sits in the southernmost tip of the Philippines, right in the province of Tawi-Tawi. The towns of Sibutu and Sitangkay, which are 13 hours away from mainland Mindanao, yet less than 2 hours away to Malaysia. But yet they are part of the Philippines and part of Mindanao, where these areas account for a significant chunk of the country's seaweeds production. Funded by the European Union and implemented in partnership with UNIDO, the Renewable Energy for Value-Adding the Tawi-Tawi Seaweeds, or RETS project, was built during the challenging period of the pandemic. You could just imagine the disruption, yet we managed to continue putting together this project, which is set to be commissioned by October in order to deliver 24/7 electricity in an area that for several decades had not seen the benefit of an electricity. This project has also provided floating solar platform, solar dryers for seaweeds farming communities to enable our seaweeds farmers improve their productivity. But from the surface, in the course of pursuing these initiatives, we need and we realize the need to go deeper into our effort to harness energy sources from the seas and oceans. And this gave rise to us putting forward our framework for the blue economy in Mindanao. But first, we're laying the ground at the moment for cohesive institutional mechanism by establishing the Mindanao Blue Economy Hub, which we are now firming up in partnership with key agencies of the Philippine government, the Climate Change Commission, the Department of Energy, the Department of Finance, and the National Economic Development Authority, and key other agencies that will vigorously pursue efforts to accelerate energy transition sorry, and blue economy development and food security in Mindanao. The hub aims to accelerate the development of a pipeline of blue projects, such as ocean energy and attendant initiatives that improve the sustainability and conservation of the region's ocean and water bodies and marine ecosystems. It will also seek to catalyze flow of capital from both public and private sources into well-designed and bankable projects. We're glad that the Asian Development Bank, thanks very much to Steve for giving us the push and eventually integrated into getting the support of ADB, among which is a forthcoming technical assistance on accelerating climate change transition through green finance in Southeast Asia, of which Mindanao is a recipient. We are also leveraging on our being part of the Green Force. This is an interagency task force of the Philippine government led by the Department of Finance that creates mechanism and framework for tapping into international finance institutions for funding bankable projects on renewable energy. Also, part of the preliminary work we're doing now is forging partnerships with experts to guide us and walk us through the path to harnessing energy economy and blue energy in Mindanao. And so in partnership with a consortium of diverse sectors, including the academe, the Mindanao Renewable Center, led by the Ateneo de Davao University, and of course, the Singapore-based company Ocean Pixel, represented here by its president and CEO, Dr. Mike Abundo. We are currently laying the ground for setting up the Blue Economy Hub in Mindanao, including baseline studies and energy resource assessment. In presenting the impact of blue economy and blue energy across the value chain, we highlight our collective desire and aspirations to pursue a whole of nation journey of protecting the oceans while sustainably harnessing its resources to produce food, generate energy, create jobs, and improve lives. We may call this at the moment as baby steps that need guidance and support. And this was the team from the Mindanao Renewable Energy Center in action, doing initial resource assessment for possible tidal energy potentials in the Gulf of Davao, in other parts of Tawi-Tawi and Surigao in Mindanao. Nonetheless, we are guided by our short to medium long term. Sorry, I don't know. Back to probably last 4 slides before that. Okay. The last recent years, quite interestingly in the Philippines, have seen major policies being crafted and have shifted towards creating an environment that is conducive for cleaner and sustainable energy technologies to grow and expand. And this is how we're looking at in terms of presenting the viability of these projects in Mindanao. In the short term, in terms of this being an immediate replacement to existing diesel special power utility groups of the National Power Corporation in some areas, to being in the medium term, driving the energy sources for some industries in these islands and viable areas, and over the long term, eventually integrating such projects into the national grid. Therefore, here are some of the key takeaways that I'd like to put forward in today's presentation. Since today is a specific moment in time when we crossed over the threshold of business as usual, and where newer technologies are made possible to usher our economic growth towards a sustainable future. And let me leave you with this key takeaways, 8 key takeaways. First, the need to harness ocean energy potential in Mindanao. Mindanao, with its extended coastline and high tidal ranges, holds the immense potential for harnessing ocean energy, and it can be leveraged to produce significant renewable energy, making the island a focal point for the country's energy transition. Second is upscaling the early stages of development. Well, as cited earlier in the presentation on San Bernardino project, in Mindanao, despite the potential, the utilization of ocean energy is still in the very early stage. That's why current projects or initiatives are limited, and therefore there's a need to upscale the application and research in this area to meet renewable energy targets. Third is addressing technology challenges. While technologies such as this have been proven in other parts of the world, adapting them to the specific conditions of Mindanao presents technological and logistics challenges. Therefore, we need to push for investment in R&D to develop robust and efficient technologies tailored and attuned to the peculiarities of the location or in the areas. Fourth is breaking the barrier, which is the high capital cost, which is common to most of energy projects, especially renewable energy. But nonetheless, the initial investment required for ocean energy projects can be put forward and aggressively pushed with several other possible innovative mechanisms. And given the nascent stage of ocean energy development in Mindanao, attracting private investment can also be difficult. That's why public funding and international finance support, of course, such as the ones from the Asian Development Bank, are critical for this early stage development. PPPs and other innovative financial incentives can also support initial investment and lower the barriers to entry in these technologies. Fifth is adhering to regulatory environment. There is a need for clearer and supportive policies that will facilitate exploration of ocean energy. That's why it's a challenge for the moment to deal with the Department of Energy, because there is no yet existing policy mechanisms for many of these technologies. That's why we'd like to work together with DOE, with support from experts in the academic sector, to be able to come up with the evidence-based policy framework that will make this technology viable for the Philippine setting in terms of regulatory regime. And other regulatory hurdles, such as environmental concerns and the allocation of maritime space for energy projects, should be addressed in a comprehensive manner. So it's not only on land where we have issues in terms of converting spaces from agri into industrial for purposes of developing energy projects. We also need to deal the same realities in terms of our ocean spaces. And 6 is furthering or pursuing active local community engagement. Harnessing ocean energy in Mindanao should be an inclusive process that takes into account the livelihoods and customs and culture of the local communities. And this has been our formula ever since we set foot in many areas, especially in the Bangsamoro region of Muslim Mindanao. 7th is integrating capacity building and development. And to support the growth of ocean energy sector, there is the need for capacity building initiatives, such as training programs and research collaborations to build local expertise, and the need to promote collaboration with universities and technical institutes to develop skilled workforce adept in ocean technology. The last key takeaway is leveraging on regional cooperation and collaboration. There's no other place in the Philippines that is much closest to any ASEAN country than Mindanao. That's why in Mindanao, decades, or not decades, but centuries ago, we are already culturally, socially, and economically integrated with our brothers and sisters in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. And so moving forward, we look back to our past in terms of pushing for the trajectory of future of Mindanao in terms of its economic viability. Establishing closer regional cooperation, especially within ASEAN, and in the case of Mindanao, within Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East ASEAN Growth Area or sub-regional cooperation, and with other countries to share knowledge and best practices and technologies for ocean energy development. This can fast-track learning curve and bring economies of scale. And so in conclusion, while the path to harnessing ocean energy in Mindanao presents several challenges, and the potential benefits in terms of energy security, jobs creation, and environmental sustainability make it a venture worth pursuing. With the right mix of supportive policies, funding, technology, and community engagement, Mindanao could become a leading light in the Philippines' transition to renewable energy. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, Assistant Secretary Montenegro. I think you captured the essence of the entire morning, that's already the conclusion in my view. But I'd like to invite all the speakers to come up, please, to address some questions from the floor. And I have a few of my own. Please come up to the podium for the Q&A. Okay, please ready your questions. You can go up to the mic later. But before that, I'd like to put up a few background. As the Asian Development Bank has an ambition of becoming the region's climate bank, and we have $100 billion target for investing in climate financing until 2030. And that includes $5 billion for healthy oceans until 2024. Hence, this program really is pushing forward with a lot of initiatives around ocean energy, around marine energy, offshore and floating renewable energies. And you saw this morning the range of possible technologies and also solutions that can become the meat of the project that are coming in from ADB in the next few years. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to answer one question. We saw already in the presentations that there are different barriers to making them mainstream, making these technologies mainstream. But there are also certain drivers. And I understand, for example, in the case of Minda, you have initiatives that have taken a bit of a foothold and is becoming more mainstream. So what are the critical, maybe not yet mentioned here, what was the significant barrier that you're facing now in terms of mainstreaming these technologies, and what was the driver in making them happen in the case of Mindanao? Thank you.
Policy structure, policy training, like several agencies did not apply. And that's why back in 2012, Minda put forward a mechanism to facilitate under a one-stop facilitation initiative, and a program to handhold every single proponent of renewable energy project in Mindanao go through the tedious regulatory process across several ministries of the government, including the local government. And that mechanism was adopted by DOE, and today it's called Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop, which is already a law. So we piloted that in Mindanao back in 2014 to demonstrate the fact that crucial to any energy project across any technology is the policy support and the enabling mechanism to make it viable. Because again, as I've cited early on, energy sector in the Philippines is policy driven. Next to the important dimension is the science of it. But while evidence-based proposals had found their way into being converted into policies, that's something that we were happy to see being captured already. But nonetheless, in the case, for instance, of some new technologies being introduced right now, we're seeing the need to work more closely with the Department of Energy and the academic institutions that are now doing in-depth studies and researches to support the viability of such technology. So yes, at the start, it's a barrier, it's a challenge, but with teamwork that we have been able to work out, then we see the viability of this moving forward in Mindanao and, well, definitely across the country.
Thank you, Asa. We can start with Dan. So,
Well, I'd like to make a comment about terminology right off, because when I talk about technologies, I don't talk about technologies. I talk about technical solutions. And technical solutions have three components. It's applications, resources, and technologies. I'll give an example I talked about a couple days ago in the workshop, the Central and West Asia workshop on clean heating and cooling. Okay, so the problem we're trying to solve, the application is space heating and cooling. The resource that we have available almost everywhere is geothermal energy, and the technologies that we need to bring the resource to the application are wells, holes in the ground, pumps, and heat pumps. When we talk about technologies, when we talk to bankers, the bankers immediately have a red flag of technology risk. Now, just as an example, wind power is not new, and offshore wind is not new. The offshore wind business is 30 years old. We're seeing the first generation of offshore wind farms being retired now. So what's the technology risk? I mean, it's TRL 10. In terms of, so that's one thing that, and I could go through a list and lay out, in the MARAS context, what are the problems we're trying to solve, right? Like, okay, seafood production, that's the application. We're trying to address food security. That's one of ADB's Strategy 2030 operational priorities. What's the resource that we have readily available? Nutrients in seawater. How do we bring those nutrients to the seaweed farm? Well, we can have a floating structure, or maybe not a floating structure. Maybe we can find a site where there's natural upwelling that brings nutrient-rich water to our aquaculture farm. And there's an example that I mentioned, Catalina Sea Ranch off the coast of California, multi-trophic, no-feed aquaculture operation. The major operating expense those guys have is boats coming from San Pedro Harbor out to the farm and hauling the catch back in. And they started out with mussels, which is a very high value product. Now, if they want to really expand that operation, at some point they might want to have some sort of renewable energy generation facility out at the farm site to power some more pumps or do some kind of processing out in the water. But we can take that basic operation and do it on a floating structure out in deep water. And we can pretty much do that anywhere in the exclusive economic zones of ADB's developing member countries, from Pakistan in the west to the Pacific in the east. And the main barrier is intellectual. It's the idea that somehow whatever we do in the ocean is going to cost twice as much as what it does offshore. And I gave you an example of a workaround to try to mobilize carbon finance or some kind of other energy transition finance to mobilize the money just to get started. Not every project needs that kind of financial assistance, but we need to start somehow. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dan. So we're hearing some of the possible drivers: policy, cost reductions, of course, in the technology itself, and collective action. There needs to be a concerted effort from several different stakeholders to make things happen. And you're saying these are not new technologies. Most of them are not new technologies, but they are emerging, but they are facing certain barriers. So what other actions do we need For example, what can ADB do to help, for example? Perhaps I'll put this across to Mike and Georgia, please.
Sure. So I can speak from the perspective of USAID's work. And in addition to what was described in this conversation about policy, I think what we're learning from our work is that streamlining the needs and the processes for each phase of the development of the project has advanced those projects. So to give you a couple of examples, what I mean by that is a large part of our work, about 35%, consists of technical assistance to strengthen the commercial viability of projects, not just related to ocean energy, clearly, but to clean energy technologies in this energy transition. So that may look like streamlining processes for licensing, for example, very important. And feasibility, as we discussed. Then working with ministries for various needs. An example might be Ministry of Finance to design fiscal incentives for perhaps manufacturing exemptions or the likes. Working with the regulatory agencies to establish or review tariff mechanisms, which are very important. And then on the side of the private sector, private actors, the project developers, supporting them with financing needs. So USAID Invest is offering grants for various needs of the project development phases. But in addition, it helps mobilize follow-on capital. So while USAID would play the role of, if you will, first loss of capital, right? Then follow-on capital is needed, and that may look, concessional debt, for example, from the larger donors. Then you move to the next stages where you have private capital, depending on the advancement of the project. So these are steps that have moved the needle in the progression of this project. And obviously there's more work to be done. But I would say one thing that's to note here, especially to your comment, Dan, it's not a measure, a standard that works in all markets for all technologies. And we do recognize the specificity of each project needs, of each location need. And we're being very mindful of assessing that. And I think what's true, sort of our true north, is the ability to provide objectivity in this process. So we inform the stakeholders, be them private or public stakeholders, of evidence-based, findings. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I hope this helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georgia. We're hearing now, beyond the technologies itself, we need to talk about solutions, as Dan has mentioned. And often these new emerging technologies are very site-specific. So you're talking about niche markets, for example. But there are ways that you can actually make them viable. And aggregation is one of them. And looking at more regional, or getting the economies of scale by having them, several of these small projects across a range of locations, that makes it more viable. And secondly, you may have heard this mentioned a lot this morning, productive uses of energy and sustainable economy that could create additional revenue streams that could, if you incorporate into this single project, just going beyond what the electricity provides for households and others, but making it as a service for other purposes like food, water, energy, and other productive uses. So maybe that is something that perhaps the couple project, the title project could look into, because you are looking at a very site-specific technology that is not very, I think in terms of technical potential, is not really that large. So what are you thinking in terms of getting the economies of scale?
Oh yeah, thank you for that question. So as you saw earlier, our contract area is like 2,000 hectares, and the energy capacity that is said to be in that area is around 500 megawatts. Now, the reason why we had to scale our project down is that we had to manage the offtake as well. Knowing that this technology is relatively new and not proven in a large scale, there is a difficulty in getting financing to build such large projects. And if you talk about your statement earlier being site specific, you're correct. It is site specific, but there is a potential for upscaling it. We are starting with a pilot project of 1 megawatt to prove that this technology works in the Philippines. But ultimately, if we are able to see that it works and the government sees that it works and financial institutions know that it works, then we're looking at a possibility of making bigger projects all over the country.
Thank you. Maybe another word from ASEC Montenegro on, I know that you already have established a one-stop shop. You have this green force, is it called? So you have all the stakeholders in place already. So in your view, how long will it take for this to actually take off now?
It depends on a number of elements and factors. Of course, one of which is the rate at which we would be able to see we would be able to see the scalability and replicability of such initiatives. The good thing about what's being done in some of the efforts being started off right now is to directly link every single renewable energy project to productive uses. And so if we have solar powered ice making plant in an area where a block of ice is more expensive than a kilo of fish, then definitely you see the viability of that. And in many other situations and circumstances where availability of electricity can very much create such transformation economically. That's why in many of these projects, even while these are being funded grant free, it's a gift, but we integrated commercial dimension. And so that we are assured of the sustainability, the commercial viability, and replicability of such initiatives. And then as we achieve a scale of replicating this and integrating this to other economic activities, particularly in the agriculture value chain in Mindanao, then we can be assured of the viability of this being scaled up. And then moving towards our gradual and phased goals of short-term to medium-term and the eventual integration into the main grid.
Thank you very much. May I invite now questions from the floor? But yeah, so while waiting for someone to stand up for a question, I'd like to also raise the idea that, you know, the Pacific Ocean, for example, occupies 15% of the globe. There's an enormous potential, not only for renewable energy, but also for food, and largely untapped for renewable energy. And our Pacific Island countries, small island developing states, have very large coastlines, and they have the enormous potential for these technologies. So, you know, this is just waiting to be harnessed. And I guess we really need to work together to design these solutions, to look at design systems and solutions and technologies that will be able to harness this vast resource and make it happen across, you know, all of these islands. Not only address, you know, fundamental development challenges, but also basic survival, because climate change is an existential threat to these small island developing states. And they are there. They have the abilities. They have the people that we can harness to make things happen, to help them help themselves be resilient. Question, please, from the floor. Please identify yourself and then ask your question. Thank you.
The might of cyclones, as you know, Bangladesh in a path of cyclones that they come. And I've seen a lot of presentations this morning, but are there any practical ideas that harness the power of cyclones and hurricanes in general? Thank you.
Interesting question. Do we have an expert in this area on the floor? So perhaps I can take
I know that in Japan, there's been quite a bit of research over the years on trying to develop a typhoon, proof typhoon wind generator. And it's, it's not commercial.
Yeah, so I mean, even wind technology has certain limits, lower and upper limits up to the, I mean, when it comes to wind speeds. So right now, I don't think in the near horizon, we can have a technology that can harness them sustainably without actually breaking from the forces of a cyclone. But yeah, we hope that this is something that can be done by, brilliant minds across the globe, and we'll be ready to maybe accept them as they become viable. But definitely it's still, I guess, a pipe dream to talk about cyclones. In fact, we are working to protect our systems from these cyclones. This is very quite a different perspective. Yes, question, please.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Norbert Schatz from Andritz. A question to Christian about your project. Who is the off-taker of the power, and what is the grid tariff for this project?
Okay, thank you for the question. So the off-taker would be the residents of Kapul Island. And as I mentioned earlier, there are two ways of us selling the power. First, if we replace the National Power Corporation, in which case we will be selling to the electric cooperative, Norsa Melco. Another way is to do a microgrid where we sell services as a generator and as a distribution utility, like a QTP, as Mr. Montenegro mentioned. So, so those are the two options for off-grid areas, and we're in the process of looking at validating which option would best fit our project, taking into consideration bureaucratic and other parameters, right? As to your question on the tariff, okay. Interestingly, for off-grid areas, they have a different tariff scheme than the main grid, and off-grid areas are highly subsidized, such that those that live in these areas pay a minimum tariff, and the rest of the cost that is incurred by the generator is paid by a universal charge, a subsidy that is paid by all electricity consumers in the Philippines. And so the aim usually of any private entity that intends to replace the existing power supplier, which is Napocor in most islands, is to target a tariff that is at least lower than the existing tariff. To share with you, in recent years, probably as late as 2022, Kapul Island's true cost from National Power Corporation is more than 20 pesos per kilowatt hour generation. Okay, and this is because for one, they're powered by diesel, and many of these diesel engines are highly derated. They consume a lot of diesel fuel, and so they're very costly in that sense. And so if you're looking at somewhere below 20, which we think is doable, then it's probably a good case for us to put before the regulatory agency and say, hey, we're running at 18, it's much higher than the main grid, but considering what's happening now, I think this is a better option in the long term.
If I could just a quick follow-up to what Christian just said. Let's think about the cost first, right? And this goes back to what I've been talking about some this week, and looking at simplified life cycle analysis and total cost of ownership. So lunar power, in-stream tidal conversion, it looks expensive on a CapEx basis, right? $6 per watt, 6 million per megawatt. Oh my God, it's so expensive. How could we ever afford that? Okay, let's step back for a little bit. If each megawatt runs at rated capacity 5,000 hours a year, you get 5,000 megawatt hours a year. Times 20 years is 100,000 megawatt hours. Divided into $6 million is only 60 megawatt hours. And 20 pesos per kilowatt hour is $350 per megawatt hour, right? So when we sit back and, okay, now I just gave you the simplified, undiscounted life cycle cost. So the full cost over a 20-year period is going to be more than that. But the base cost, $60 per megawatt hour compared to 350. I don't know, I'm not a math whiz, but it sounds to me like the lunar power is actually a bargain. But we look at the CapEx and we tend to get stuck on that number. It's like, oh, it's too expensive. We can't afford it. It's like, no, that's not that. It's eminently affordable. We're putting money into people's pockets when we do this. How do we get over the initial CapEx barrier? That's what the carbon markets are supposed to be doing. And the carbon markets aren't doing their job. And okay, ADB is Asia's self-proclaimed climate bank. ADB is supposed to be figuring out how to solve these problems and how to bring some creative financing solution. Miguel mentioned it earlier. It's a viability gap financing is the basic concept of how to go about addressing that initial cost barrier. You're not getting paid to help them on Kapul though, so someone else is supposed to be helping them. The TA is already closed. Sorry.
As you're saying, we need to design another TA to help.
No, I'm not saying that we don't need to spend $1 million to figure out the solution. I'm picking up on what Georgia said. The solutions tend to be location specific, right? So what do we need to get to that? And if we go project by project, we don't get the scale and the speed that we need to address the global challenge of climate change and biodiversity. So, okay, we had this discussion under a TA 8944 that was run by the Energy Sector Group that closed sometime in the last year or two. And we looked at Kapul and we looked at a bunch of other projects, and we had a discussion with Land Bank of the Philippines and Development Bank of the Philippines. And we said, okay, look, if you really want to do a lot of renewable energy at scale in the Philippines, ADB can help by doing a financial intermediation investment operation. ADB puts in some money that goes to DBP or Land Bank, and then DBP or Land Bank or both go out and finance a broad portfolio of projects that's not all one technology. That's the full spectrum of clean energy. And then the technology risk of what appears to be a very high risk tidal energy project is spread across the portfolio. And what's ADB's value addition? Okay, if you need some portfolio insurance, ADB can bring a little bit of grant money to cover some of that additional risk. And that money, in addition to ADB's ordinary capital resources, the soft money that can come in for the portfolio risk insurance, we can achieve leverage of 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 or 50 to 1 if we're careful about doing it. It's really not that complicated.
Thank you, Dan. Indeed, the Asian Development Bank has a suite of financing facilities that actually assist not only our governments but also the private sector to delve into newer and future technologies, if I say so. There is also a potential now. We are looking into what we call an investment facility that will cater to a range or a portfolio of renewable energy projects that can be supported on a programmatic approach with a much simpler and streamlined business process. We are rolling this out in the Pacific, but also looking to expand and maybe scale it up across the bank to look at potentially how we can make things happen faster and at a lower cost. So this is something we are looking into, and certainly a lot of these technologies or solutions could figure perhaps at some point, but we are certainly looking at a suite of technologies and solutions that could also become eligible for financing or processing under this investment facility. So we look forward to having that. And we will need a lot of experts also to even design this investment facility, but certainly it is a possibility that we are looking at in the next 2 to 3 years. Any more questions, please? We have, I guess, time for some, please.
Yeah, hi, my name is Peter Bassett from Asia Clean Energy Partners. I'm curious, just in the spirit of keeping costs down, is there any, are there any projects looking at repurposing oil rigs, offshore oil rigs, and harnessing that for wave or ocean tech? Is that your question, Steve Peters? Okay. Glad for the excitement.
Steve gave you $20 to ask that question, right? We've been looking at this under the MARAS TA, the Marine Aquaculture Reefs, Renewable Energy and Ecotourism for Ecosystem Services. And there's a tremendous opportunity in Southeast Asia. There are about 1,800 offshore oil and gas rigs, hundreds of which are near the end of their economic lifetime and are starting to be retired. And actually 7 rigs offshore in the Philippines. In Southeast Asia, actually, the Philippines has the most advanced rigs to reefs program. And 7 rigs that are off in the West Philippine Sea have been left in the water. My understanding is that 4 of those were transferred to the Philippines Department of Defense, 2 went to the Coast Guard, and 1 went to the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquaculture Resources. And under the MARAS TA, there was a call for project proposals, one of which was the Majuro tank farm that I talked about earlier. And there were a couple actually that came in for a rigs to reefs program that would start in Malaysia or Thailand. Most of the rigs are in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. And there's a couple, there's been one approval from February last year in Indonesia that's offshore East Kalimantan. And I think it's one operator, it's one operating group. I think they actually have 3 rigs that are going to be left in the water. And those are going, I believe, are going to be repurposed as scuba diving operation because it's in one of the best scuba diving places offshore East Kalimantan. All the divers want to go there. But when the rig's operating, sucking oil and gas out of the ground, there's a safety exclusion zone. So you can't go there and go diving. But when that ends, then you've got a reef has grown on the rig. So don't call it an artificial reef or I'm going to hit you because it's a reef that's alive. It has grown without much encouragement. And it would be a criminal act to take that out of the water and bring it all on shore. So that the opportunity is there to repurpose that, both for marine aquaculture, but also for sport diving and maybe sport fishing, catch and release. And that's one of the ways that we regenerate ecosystem services in the ocean. And just one quick point. Oh, that's new, right? Oh, wait, sorry. We've been doing this in the United States since 1987. We've got 35 years plus of experience with 558 rigs left in the water in the Western Gulf of Mexico alone. So either we don't know anything, we haven't learned anything, or we know everything we need to know. And my stance on this is that we know everything we need to know. Now, not every rig that's in the water is a candidate to stay in the water, but there are people that know how to do this. Nothing needs to be invented. What we need is government decision-making to have a just straightforward policy framework to let the petroleum operators make their own decisions about whether to leave those rigs in the water or not.
Thank you very much, Dan. And I think we have run out of time. As we have heard today, technologies continue to advance, costs will continue to decrease, and supportive policies will drive the ocean energy and renewable energy in general as we transition globally to a more sustainable future and energy sector portfolio. Thank you very much to our speakers. Please give them a round of applause again. And thank you all for bearing with us. We are in the last stretch of the ASAP, and we'll see you all at lunch and then at the closing plenary this afternoon. Thank you very much, and thank you, speakers.